Yeah. Thank you. Evening. I'd like to call the February 6, 2023 meeting of the University Heights City Council to order. Mrs. Thomas, we call the roll.
Mrs. Sacks.
Here.
Mrs. Springfield.
Here.
Mr. Rock,
Here.
Mrs. Wise, Mr. Gould,
Here.
Mr. Cooney,
Here.
Mr. King,
Here. Okay, all members are present. Will you please join me in reciting the pledge of allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic which is set one nation. We have two sets of minutes to consider this evening. There is a set from January 3rd, 2023, a set from January 17th, 2023. Is there a motion?
for January 17th.
Okay, we'll start with January 17th. We have a motion to approve by Mrs. Weiss. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Second by Mrs. Weinfeld. Any discussion? Mrs. Thomas, we call the roll.
Mrs. Sacks. Aye. Mrs. Blanco. Aye. Mr. Rock,
Abstain.
Mrs. Wise. Aye. Mr. Gould,
Aye.
Mr. Cooney,
Abstain.
Mr. King,
Aye. Okay, very good. Motion carries. Next, we have set of minutes from January 3rd, 2023. Is there a motion? Motion approved by Mrs. Weiss. Is there a second? Seconded. Second by Mr. King. Any discussion? Mrs. Thomas, we call the roll.
Mrs. Sacks. Aye. Mrs. Blanco. Aye. Mr. Rock,
Aye.
Mrs. Wise. Aye. Mr. Gould,
Aye.
Mr. Cooney,
Aye.
Mr. King,
Aye. And very good, motion carries. Next item is additions and removals from the agenda and referrals to committee. Are there any additions or removals from the agenda or referrals to committee? If there are none, then we will go to comments from the audience. Speakers are limited to 5 minutes. Is there anybody here who would care to address the city this evening? Very good. If there is no public comment, then we will move on to reports and communications from the mayor and the taking of action thereon. I will keep this short. On Wednesday, February 15, 2023, 1 week from this Wednesday, I will deliver the 2023 State of the City address. The State of the City will be at John Carroll University, Donahue Auditorium, at Dolan Science Center at 6 p.m. That would be February 15th. Okay, that's okay. February 15th, 6 p.m. All right. We have a vacancy on the Architectural Review Board. Richard Kiley, who served with distinction through his time on the ARB, has concluded his term as of the end of January. Due to his professional obligations and limited availability to attend Thursday morning meetings in person, I thank Mr. Kiley for his service and announce this evening that the administration is accepting applications for the position. For the vacancy, we're looking for a resident who is an architect, or in the alternative, a resident from a related profession. If the person has demonstrated an interest, experience, or knowledge in architecture, landscape architecture, urban design, or related disciplines. The meetings are monthly, typically the second Thursday morning of the month at 8 a.m. in person here at Wyoming. To apply, please send a statement of interest and resume or curriculum vitae to info@universityheights.com. There is no deadline. I will consider applicants on a rolling basis until I make a nomination for council confirmation. One more brief item. We did receive 2 thank you notes. One from Greater Cleveland Food Bank, one from Cleveland Kosher Food Pantry, thanking the city for recent donations of $10,000 to each entity from our ARPA money. They were, well, I'm not going to read both of them into the record here, but both were grateful and thankful for our city's assistance to them on the issues of food insecurity, especially in these challenging economic times. And they thank us, and I'm glad that we were able to assist them in their effort to serve our shared constituents. Thank you. This concludes my report. Next item is reports and communications from the city council and the taking of action thereon. Mrs. Blunt.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. One thing just to clarify that Mr. Kiley did not step down by the mayor. The council had 2 committee meetings. One was joint finance and one was Joint Facilities and Infrastructure Committee meeting. The finance meeting had an excellent meeting discussing the potential elected official campaign donation ordinance. There were some important questions that were discussed. More research needs to be done. Also, a professional services ordinance was discussed and is on the agenda for this evening. The Joint Facilities Committee meeting met after an exhaustive 8 months of touring facilities and meeting with directors. The Facilities Committee has recommended changes to the original assessment. The directors, on their own directive, downsize their facilities, the fire by 25% and the police by 40%. The service department also slightly lowered the original amount by about 4,000 square feet. The committee is updating the assessment and will give that to the mayor for review as requested. The mayor was asked almost a year ago to obtain a contract from the school board regarding using part of the Wiley property for our service yard. That needs to be attained to move forward with the plans. The city also hopes to obtain the Yabi property to begin the site work for the project. Financing is possible with no cost to the taxpayers. Our safety and service employees work in deplorable condition. The committee can begin the RFQ process for an owner's rep when the mayor gets the Wiley contract and with the Yabi site this year. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Weiss. Are there any other reports or communications from City Council? Seeing none, we will now proceed to item 8, reading and disposition of ordinances, resolutions, motions, and consideration of agenda items. The first item is item A, a motion to authorize the mayor to enter into a contract with LNE Group in an amount not to exceed $30,000 for federal advocacy support for the city of University Heights. We have present here today the principal and founder, president and founder of LNE Group, Lee Weingart. So, Mr. Weingart, you may have the floor.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Vice Mayor and members of council, distinguished members of the administration. My name is Lee Weingart, and I'm the president of LNE Group. We are the oldest and largest combined federal and state lobbying firm in the state of Ohio. We have been in business since 2002. And last week I met with the mayor and talked with the vice mayor about pursuing federal funding through the earmark process in the federal budget. After a long hiatus, in 2021, earmarks came back in the federal budget. And earmarks are simply directed spending. A member of Congress for the Senate directs a certain amount of money to a certain recipient for a certain project. In last year's budget, there were about $15 billion in earmarks across the United States. Ohio got its share of those. We support a lot of organizations that were seeking funding in the process. Secured about $25 million in earmarks for our clients in Ohio and throughout the United States. I talked to the mayor and the vice mayor about potential projects. There are a lot of things you could do: community development, economic development, health and safety. But there was a little focus on infrastructure, particularly around flooding and sewer work, which is a good area to focus on because there's a lot of money in the federal budget, local governments, when it comes to sewers, flooding, and water-related projects, especially in Ohio. There are 4 different accounts that you can earmark for sewer or flood-related projects in the state of Ohio. We've done that successfully. Last year, we secured $1.5 million for the city of Brunswick for a sewer project, and $800,000 for Belmont County, Ohio, for a sewer project. And we secured $1.5 million from Mayfield Heights a few years ago for a sewer project on Mayfield Road. So if sewers or flooding are an issue, that'd be a great way to pursue federal funding. Now, most federal lobbying firms will force you into a retainer relationship. 1 year, minimum $6,000 a month. That's what your friends at Shaker Heights paid last year for their lobbyist, and they got nothing. So we have a different model. We absorb a lot of the risk for our clients. So there's 3 payments, potentially 3 payments. The first is a $10,000 payment to prepare the earmark application and to lobby your members of Congress, Representative Chantel Brown, Senator Sherrod Brown. We're not certain yet if Senator J.D. Vance will entertain earmarks. If he does, we'll submit it there as well. But we know for certain that Senator Sherrod Brown, Representative Chantel Brown, will take earmarks this year. So we will submit that for $10,000 and do all the lobbying work around it. If that project appears in one of the 12 appropriations bills, we get paid a second $10,000. Once you're in the bill, as long as the budget passes, you will get your money. Projects never drop out of appropriations bills, nor are they ever added to appropriations bills. So if your project does not appear in one of the bills, you're done paying us. That's it, $10,000. The only other potential pitfall is not passing the federal budget. Every so often, because of partisan issues, the federal budget is not passed as it's written. Instead, they have a continuing resolution, which just keeps the spending from the prior year into the next year, but it strips out all earmarks. So, in that third payment, if the federal budget is enacted, we get a third $10,000 payment, thus the not to exceed $30,000 contract limit proposed to the mayor. Again, we absorb a lot of the risk because if for some reason your project does not appear in one of the bills, you stop paying us. Under other relationships that are retainer-based, you would keep paying that firm, even if you knew you weren't going to get any funding. So we know we've got a very good record over the years. About 65% of what we submit gets funded. So we're very selective in how we submit projects to members of Congress. We try to avoid conflicts. We're not going to be submitting to Chantel Brown another flood-related or sewer-related project in her district. So we treat our clients as we'd like to be treated by our clients. So pretty straightforward process for us. We've got a great, strong team in Washington and Cleveland and Columbus. Love to do your work this year if you would let us do it.
Okay, very good.
Any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Weingart. Before I ask if there are questions, I want to fill in some additional information. I think everybody on council is aware or may recall that in May of 2020, NURSD finalized a report with regard to necessary upgrades that we need here in the community for our sewer system. And if you go through the various phases, in May 2020 we're looking at approximately $178 million to finish 3 phases of that project. If we were to pay for that ourselves without seeking any outside money, that approximates about $42,000 a house. We're not in a position where we would want to ask our residents to pay $42,000 on their property tax bill in a given year to upgrade all the sewer. There are things that need to be done under the Clean Water Act, things that need to be done to help keep Lake Erie clean, which is in everybody's interest, not just the residents of University Heights. And there have been efforts that we've made previously. I've met with the EPA wastewater administrator personally. We did, working together, Mr. Chuney, Mr. Corney, and I did petition to get money for a sewer project in our city. The last go around, we didn't make the cut, and it felt like we should be doing something more to get an earmark for our community to get started on this. And thus the conversation with Mr. Weingart and his firm. So I would ask that we give this due consideration and for your go ahead. Are there any questions?
Basic question.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, this is Saxon.
Thank you, Mr. Cooney. Thank you, Mayor. And thank you very much for coming tonight, Mr. Weingart, and presenting. This seems like a very interesting proposal. Basic question. So if a city is designated without kind of exclusively within the district by University Heights, how did we get the good fortune of it being our turn?
Well, I don't know that it's anybody's turn in the
Okay.
process. All cities are eligible for earmark funding for a variety of projects. And so it's often helpful to have someone pushing your project with a member of Congress. That's what we do. Essentially, we push projects, we draft the application so they're as compelling as possible. And then we push the project with a member of Congress or the senator to try and get it on top of the heap. Representatives will have 15 projects they can submit to the appropriations committees for consideration. Senators, not surprisingly, have no limit on how many they can submit. So we would submit your project both to Representative Brown and to Senator Brown to double the chance of it getting funding. Other cities, certainly you could apply without me being involved or any lobbying firm, and many cities do. Not very many get funding if they go on their own. So it's just, we are the guide when it comes to helping clients secure money. We secured about $800 million over the last 21 years of our business, a lot here in Ohio in the United States. So we know the process, we know the players, we know how to make sure that we present your project in the best light to maximize the chance of it being selected for funding.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Cooney.
Yeah, so it would be essentially, it's going to be on a per project basis. Correct, $10,000 at each stage if the work proceed.
Yes, thank you. I think, before I call you, Mr. King, if I may elaborate. Yeah, obviously, we're not going for all 178 billion. We're gonna have to fight this up. I mean, you heard the size of some of the projects that Longer mentioned, the 1.5 million for Brunswick, the 1.5 million for Mayfield Heights, 800,000 for Belmont County. I mean, we're looking at parceling off a nice bite-sized project to get us, University Heights is fortunate that we're not under a consent decree. One of the reasons we're not is because we have done a lot of good work to keep up our sewers, antiquated though they are. And, that's been done because of constant care and attention by our city engineer and our service department over many years. But the time has still come nevertheless to begin the conversion to come into compliance with the Clean Water Act. And we got to start. And what we do not want is a situation where we end up in a consent decree because we haven't made to make improvements. By making this effort, even if Mr. Weingart is not successful in getting this for our city, we then can point at this and say that we have been trying. We tried on the last go around in-house. We were trying then with Mr. Weingart and his firm to get the funding that we need to begin working on these sorts of projects going. And I think that only bears to favor us in the long run with regard to our dedication to the environment, our dedication to progress, our dedication to the infrastructure. And of course, with all that, improving the sewers for our residents. We are aware of various flooding incidents, some of which could be remedied by a project like this. Having said all that, I know Mr. King, you wanted the floor.
Thank you for presenting tonight, Mr. Weingart. I know we've been talking specifically about federal funding here, but you mentioned there were 4 funds at the state level that can deal or that can help with sewer projects.
Actually, it was 4 federal funds.
Okay,
Yeah. This is all federal.
thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. King. This is what.
Thank you so much for coming tonight. So you're thinking between about $1 and $2 million?
Yeah, I would propose a $1 to $2 million project. Exactly. Because they understand that sewer projects are not going to be $10,000 job. You're talking significant construction, renovation, digging. So yeah, I would recommend something in the $1 to $2 million area.
Thank you.
Thank you again, Mayor. I have a question for administration. What is the role of the city engineer with regard to trying to procure different types of funding at any level, even federal, for instance? Is that something that's within that purview?
Well, the city engineer is not a law. The city engineer is primarily performing engineering functions. As did assist with an application that I made last year or 2 years ago now, and has from time to time processed with, for instance, NURSD and funding for certain funding sources that are out. And take for instance the Washington Facility Safer project. That's being fully funded outside. We're not having to put I think it's a reimbursement grant. I think it's 100%. So, you know, we have that, we were aware that that money was available to us, but Mr. Cheney handled it. But this is to do something above and beyond the call for what any city engineer.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, I know your engineer very well, actually, and I work with him closely regarding application we would submit on behalf of the city.
Oh, that's good. Thank you.
Mayor,
Yes, Mr. Cole.
so I know that there are multiple kind of government advocacy or lobbying firms in this space, capital partners, certain law firms, Fastidious have a presence in DC. Can you share a little bit about how Mr. Weingart came to be in your office, how you came to select them as the group to present to council, and what the kind of plan was in advance of the proposal coming to us here?
Well, I first spoke with Mr. Weingart about the possibility of doing this immediately following the application that we did 2 years ago. And I knew that he did this kind of work, and I came to him and spoke with him about it. We actually had coffee, and we had a coffee again about a week ago where we picked up where we left off on the conversation nearly 2 years ago. And said, you know, this is still something I'm interested in. Mr. Weingart remembered that it was something I was interested in. And we got together and talked about the possibilities. And that led to the letter dated February 1, which is in the packet and which is here before you now. Thanks.
And Mr. Weingart, you find yourself kind of in a place where I know council has shared its desire to do less kind of direct appointing of contracts and more bidding so that our taxpayers at least have some transparency into the process. I love the structure of what you're discussing. Sounds like a fantastic deal, frankly. You know, at 10,000, 10,000, 10,000 for the potential return. And at least we get to see that progress of your work going forward. I think it's also, as you pointed out, quite unique. So I had a couple questions for you, just in terms of kind of your group. I know you as the Republican candidate for county council. So can you share why you and your organization are the best individual and entity to lobby two Democrat politicians?
So we have been from the beginning bipartisan firm. The person who runs our federal lobbying practice is a Democrat. I'm Republican, others in the firm are Republican and Democrat. So we have always prided ourselves on working across the aisle. Our work the last 3 years or 2 years since earmarks came back has been with Republicans and Democrats both. So I mentioned the money that we've gotten. I didn't mention money. We got money for Karen Morehouse last year, $500,000 that came from Sherrod Brown. We got money for the United Black Fund, $1 million that came from Sherrod Brown and Chantel Brown. So the members of Congress, I'm happy to report, during the appropriations process, don't look very much at the partisan issues. They want professional to bring forward good projects that they want to support. So it isn't so much about me, it's more about you. It's about the project that you are promoting and our job to make sure that it's promoted as efficiently and effectively as possible. So we work very closely with Chantel Brown, with Sherrod Brown, with Dave Joyce, who's not your member of Congress, but it's on the Appropriations Committee, one of the 12 subcommittee chairmen called a Cardinal. We work closely with him as well. We worked with Marcy Kaptur on projects before and Tim Ryan when he was in Congress. So we work well with Republicans and Democrats to represent our clients and to get funding for our clients' projects.
Thanks for that. I think one of the other things that I'm always aware of, and you know, the east side, you're have lived over in this area in the past, and competitive success. I think oftentimes we have people come in and talk about projects for University Heights and what they can do and the grant funding they can get. We had an environmental kind of presentation at one point. We needed to redirect, I think, the conversation to success in comparative communities. So, you know, we are a small community. We are not a Shaker Heights or Cleveland Heights. those types of larger cities that individual politicians may have a larger footprint than ours. So, can you kind of share, what are the prospects of a community like ours, and what success do you see in the earmark process for a city like University Heights?
The good news is when you're going for sewer or water projects in Ohio, your chances are higher because there's so much money available. 15 years ago, 20 years ago, then Senator George Wonders created a fund only for Ohio sewer and water projects. It's in the federal budget. It appears it's funded every year, and only Ohio governments can apply for this project. So if you're Minnesota, West Virginia, North Carolina, you can't apply. It's only for Ohio. Size of the city doesn't matter as much. If there is a perceived need by the member of Congress or senator, you're going to get selected and submitted to the Appropriations Committee. So I'm not too concerned about, University Heights being smaller than Cleveland Heights or Shaker Heights. I think if you have somebody in there fighting for you, who's promoting your project, who's going to Washington and sitting down with Senator Brown, Representative Brown to promote your project, I think that helps you get above the fray. A lot of the folks just submit the application. They don't really understand the process, don't know how to get to Washington and meet with the members of Congress or their staff here in the district. So we know all those things, which gives our clients the advantage over other projects that are not represented by firms like ours.
And I would think that these, especially the staff members of these politicians, are kind of subject matter experts. They know the area. Talk to me how detailed of a project you are looking at. I have not seen any plans for a specific project. I know the council hasn't kind of come up with an idea of what that would be or seen one from the administration. That concerns me to hire a lobbyist to pitch a project that we haven't approved. What's the timeline like? What detail do you need in order to make a successful pitch?
So the detail actually is not that great. In some cases, we're limited to words, like 1,000 words, 600 words in the application.
Okay.
So we don't need plans, drawings. We just need a description of the project. What's the public good coming from the project? Who's going to benefit? Those are important things that get your project moved to the top of the pile in the member's office. The challenge is timing. The House goes first for appropriations. We'll start seeing deadlines at the end of February and mid-March on the House side. And then probably in end of March, mid-April on the Senate side. So we can do the work quickly. We've done these overnight as needed. But I would say you want to get in the process here in the next couple of weeks. So we'll sit down with Chantel's office and Sharon's office. You can get your project promoted, get all the paperwork submitted before the deadline. And then, the process really begins after that, working them to get support for your project.
And then when it comes time to actually appropriating those funds, if you're successful and then spending them, what are the requirements on this body to stay within the spirit of the appropriation, the federal appropriation? So, this grant is given, or this, we end up in the budget, it's earmarked for us for reducing flow. And then it comes to us and we get to decide if that is separation of, sewer and storm drains, or clearing out certain areas, or putting in additional pumps. The details of how we achieve that spirit are, how broad is that up?
So the details are probably not going to be in the application. There will be enough room for it. I mean, they'll want to know the area that you're focusing on, but the methodology used to reduce flooding or improve the sewers, that's up to you. The members of Congress are not going to direct you, how to reduce flooding in your community. They are going to hopefully provide the money to do that. So the process is, once the federal budget is enacted, you'll be contacted by the department that has the earmark, and we'll work with you through that at no additional charge, just to make sure you get your money. But you will be the primary contact, not us. So they started sending out letters for fiscal 23. The budget was passed the end of December. They're hitting right now. So all of our clients who are earmarked in the current budget are getting their notifications on pulling down the money. In most cases, in some cases, it's reimbursement. In a lot of cases, it's not. It's just a straight outright grant.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Weiss.
Thank you. Just a couple more clarifying questions. So these are federal dollars. So are those dollars subject to FEMA type rules where an EHP is going to be needed and then other very specific, not just qualifications, but documentation that comes with this grant?
Typically not. No, this is different than competitive grant programs or other programs where there's federal funding involved. If a member of Congress directs an agency to give a certain amount of money to a certain recipient for a certain project, it has to be done that way. Yeah, so there's not, paperwork is greatly reduced on the front end and on the back end.
Here, because the city doesn't necessarily have those resources for grant writers and consultants and things like that.
Yeah, but you won't need any grant writing. The writing itself is done up front, and it's,
Oh,
yeah, right.
thank you.
Are there any other questions? For Mr. Wong? Oh, I just have one. If we approve this evening, what's our timeline?
We want to get started soon, next week.
And we have things that we need to submit basically at the end of the month.
Yep.
And meetings we need to take.
Yeah.
in the interim.
Typically, Representative Capter goes first. Representative Brown is a little later. I think it could probably be safe to say mid-March, but we're gonna want to get on it right away.
All right, thank you. Any other questions for Mr. Wenger? Is there a motion to authorize the mayor to enter a contract with LNE Group in the amount not to exceed $30,000 for federal entities to support the city university?
Mayor also move.
Motion approved by Mrs. Blackfeld. Is there a second? Second by Mrs. Weiss. Any discussion?
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify that the purpose of the advocacy, is that for the flooding, is that intended?
Oh, it's for a project for the sewer upgrades overall. Flooding is a component of that.
Okay,
Yeah, last time we, Meadowbrook, a portion of Meadowbrook was the subject of what we applied for, and part of why we chose it, I believe, is because of the susceptibility and past incidents on flooding. Mr. Cheney and Mr. Corney, I think you may recall, and can confirm. Yeah,
so the purpose of the advocacy is for the students.
yes, that's what we're going for here. It's the place where we have, the most demonstrable need, and we know that there are upgrades we need. Okay, so we have a motion and a second. If there is no further discussion, Mrs. Thomas, we call the roll.
Mrs. Sacks.
Aye.
Mrs. Blanco. Aye. Mr. Rod.
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss.
Aye.
Mr. Gould.
Aye.
Mr. Cooney.
Aye.
Mr. King.
Aye.
Very good, motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, next is item B, a motion to authorize the mayor to enter the contract for transportation services connection with transportation services contract with Senior Transportation Connection and amount not to exceed $20,000 payable at the January 17, 2023 meeting. I think there were a couple of changes. Mr. McConnell, you before.
I was not involved in that, and I changed them.
Oh, that's right. Sure. Okay.
It may have been Ms. Fisher.
Yeah, since she's not here this evening, there was a cleanup, clarification on the fuel price issue. I think there was a drafting inconsistency in the last one, and that's been cured here. Dennis, do you know anything about that?
Not about the specifics, but I did get the information I had requested with insurance.
Okay, and that was the other thing, I think. So I believe we have this in final form. Is there a motion?
Mayor, can you help describe the fuel escalation again? I'm not understanding the draft.
Okay, fuel escalation section of the contract is third page at the top. Negotiated base rate assumes a fuel cost at or below $3.75 per gallon. Fuel adjustments will be determined by using a monthly average for the Cleveland Elyria Lorraine market shown on the AAA fuel gauge report.com. under field trip charge, if the monthly average exceeds the base rate, fuel surcharge per trip will equal 0.01 for every 0.01 above the base rate. 1 cent. For example, if the monthly average exceeds the base rate by 13 cents, the monthly fuel charge will be 13.13 times the number of trips for the month. Vehicle hour charge applies to the group trips and contracts based upon hourly rates. If the monthly average exceeds the base rate, the fuel charge per hour will exceed 0.01 for every 0.01 above the base rate. For example, if the monthly average exceeds the base rate by 0.13, the monthly fuel charge will be 0.13 times the number of vehicle hours for the month times 1.3. SEC's average in trips per hour. This monthly fuel surcharge will appear as a separate line item on your invoice. With the increase in fuel costs and that occurred since prior years, the Music Transportation connection, there is a concern with regard to being able to deliver on these services and be able to for them, and then also be able to pass on some of these costs to us on that required basis. You know, if we find that the costs are such that it's no longer a program that we need to, that we can support, there is, of course, the provision that allows us to cancel this agreement upon notice. And do know that there are a number of seniors who rely on this program. It's not a large number, but the ones that rely on it heavily, and they're able to age in place here in the city of University Heights because this program exists.
I'm sorry, I mean, I know I read those words too, but I don't understand what they mean. So let's looking at the vehicle hour charge. I'm not sure what is being referenced here, if it's a rate or if it's a dollar amount. And if it's a rate, it seems to be suggesting that it would be maybe 3 times the number of vehicle hours is less than the number of vehicle hours. I don't know that that's what it's intended. So I'm just trying to understand how this example, as you just read, works. I don't understand what this means. And for instance, the language that was struck from the contract is pretty clear about what it's doing. It's, 0.07 cents, there's a dollar sign there, times 1.5 times 3,000 equals $315. So I understand looking at the revenue hour calculation that was taken out of the contract, what was intended and the result for the bottom line. But I don't understand what it means, the per hour equal to the 0.1 every, I don't get how that base rate is calculated and what it means for how much the city would be charged in the event that that amount on the AA fuel gauge goes above 3.75. $3.75. Do you understand that?
Just looking over my notes here.
So like in this example, in the example given here, if the monthly average exceeds the base rate by 0.13, and I'm assuming that means 13 cents. So they're suggesting that the average would be $3.88 in this example. So $3.88. So the monthly fuel surcharge will be 0.13 times the number of vehicle hours. And
I think if there is a question about what is meant here, then we should be hearing from the drafter of the contract. That's Laura Kleinman. So if we can bring Laura Kleinman back. She offered to come back. We didn't think we would need to do that, but we can do that. We can table this one more time and ask for Ms. Kleinman's available.
Yeah,
I don't want to interpret what I think is said here versus what she is saying. There's a question. Yeah, Mr. Kenny.
thank you, Mayor. The base rate is at $3.75 per gallon. And what they're using is the monthly average with the link, which goes to AAA. And that's, if you go to that link, you can see it from the state of Ohio. I believe it's at 335, 340. So the surcharge, if it says the base rate is cost at or below $3.75 per gallon. So if it were to exceed $3.75 per gallon, the surcharge for the cost of that additional cost of fuel would appear as a separate line on the invoice. To my understanding, reading this, based on some experiences that I have, is that you will see a cost for $3.75 per gallon. So if the current rate was at $3.90, you would see a surcharge line for 15 cents per gallon to equal the $3.90 if that were the cost of the gallon of gas at that time, because they exceeded it.
Where do you get the gallon? I mean, I understand.
It's right under, it says fuel escalation, but a negotiated base rate assumes fuel cost at or below $3.75 per gallon.
Right, but how does that apply to the vehicle hourly charge? And when they take hourly charge out, they changed the wording from revenue hour to just hourly surcharge, and I'm just trying to hourly rate, and I'm trying to understand what that calculation looks like. So STC's average trips per hour is what the 1.3 comes out to. So it's 13 cents times a certain number of vehicle hours. So times 1.3.
I would think it would mean that the number of hours that their vehicles use providing service to our residents. So that number, that total number of hours times the example 0.13, that's sort of.
So there are two components, plus the possibility of an extra line to reflect the surcharge above $3.75. So there's $3.75 per gallon. Then there's the surcharge for any cost above that, penny for penny. Then there's an additional vehicle hour charge. I would feel more comfortable. It talks more about fuel surcharge rather than hours of driver compensation, if that's what we're talking about. I'm not sure what the, or whatever, or vehicle in use. It uses language, fuel surcharge in the vehicle hour charge. I think that's a mistake.
I would agree that the base rate for the vehicle hour charges has not been stated, and that's
It might be a
probably
mistake.
causing some.
Yes, looks like it's repetitive, actually. Rather than differentiating. And
Yes, this is
We have a lot of good guesses, from both my colleagues. Some may be right, but all of them are having to guess at this as well. I'd like to make a motion that this be tabled for the next meeting. Hopefully Simon can come back and answer our questions and we can get this.
Yeah, very good. We have a motion tabled by Mrs. Bluntfeld for the next meeting. Is there a second? Second by Mrs. Sacks. Mrs. Thomas, we call the roll.
Mrs. Sacks.
Aye.
Mrs. Blankenship.
Aye.
Mr. Rod.
Aye.
Mr. Wise. Mr. Gould.
Aye.
Mr. Cooney.
Aye.
Mr. King.
Aye.
Okay, the item is tabled. Next then is item C. Resolution 2023-08, recognizing and celebrating Black History Month, which I will now read into the record. Whereas the city of University Heights is a community that values its diverse population and celebrates the many cultures, backgrounds, and histories of its residents. And whereas Black History Month has been recognized each February by U.S. presidents since 1976 and grew out of the creation of Negro History Week in 1926 by Carter G. Woodson, an author, historian, and son of enslaved persons. And whereas Black Americans have struggled and persevered through enslavement, persecution, and oppression, facing still today systemic barriers to equality in our economy, at the ballot box, and in many other facets of American society. And whereas despite these seemingly unending challenges, Black Americans have continuously made critical contributions to America and the world through innovation in arts, science, business, law, and governance, healthcare, education, and more, as well as to our broader national culture and heritage. And whereas the Association for the Study of African American Life and History, founded by Mr. Woodson, has declared the 2023 theme for Black History Month to be resistance. And whereas by resisting Black people, I have achieved triumphs, successes, and progress as seen in the end of slavery, dismantling of Jim Crow segregation, increased political representation at all levels of government, desegregation of educational institutions, the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the opening of the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History in Washington, D.C., and increased and diverse representation of Black experiences in media. And whereas Black resistance strategies have served as a model for every other social movement in the country, thus the legacy and importance of these actions cannot be understated. And whereas it is essential to our continued growth and progress as a nation that we honor the legacy and contributions of Black Americans while vowing to continue the necessary work of reckoning with past injustice and seeking equity for our present and future, not only in this month, but indeed all year round. And whereas Black history is American history, and during Black History Month, we pay tribute to the contributions and accomplishments of past generations as we reaffirm our commitment to keeping the American dream alive for generations to come. Now therefore be it jointly resolved, jointly proclaimed by the mayor and resolved by the city council of the city of University Heights, Ohio, that Section 1, the city of University Heights recognizes and honors Black History Month in February 2023, celebrates our Black neighbors, and encourages all residents to further educate themselves on Black history in America and seek remedies to continued injustices. Section 2, it is hereby found that all formal actions of this council concerning and relating to the passage of this resolution were adopted in an open meeting of this council, and that all deliberations of this council and of any of its committees that resulted in such formal action were in meetings open to the public in compliance with all legal requirements. Whereas, or rather, Section 3, this resolution is hereby declared to be an emergency measure necessary for the immediate preservation of public peace, health, and safety of the city. The emergency being for the reason that this resolution pertains to the concurrent celebration of Black History Month in February 2023. Wherefore, this resolution shall be in full force and effect from and immediately after its adoption and approval by the mayor. We have, I believe we have a version for all members to sign.
We had a problem with the printer at the end of the day.
We did, okay, well, all the same, we can arrange for those signatures on another occasion, but we do have a resolution that if passed, all folks voting and as well as myself as the mayor would be signing off on this resolution. Thank you. Is there a motion?
So moved.
And is it on emergency? A motion to approve on emergency by Mr. Gould.
Ceremony.
Okay. All right, very good. And seconded by Mr. Rock. And as for reasons just stated by the law director, we will take one vote. Before we do that, does anybody have any comment, anything they'd like to add before we proceed with the vote? Seeing none, Mrs. Thomas, we call the roll.
Mrs. Sacks. Aye. Mrs. Blanco.
Aye.
Mr. Rock.
Aye.
Mrs. Wise. Aye. Mr. Rule.
Aye.
Mr. Cooney.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, very good. Motion carries. Thank you. Next is item D, ordinance 2022-56, accepting opioid settlement funds and directing the placement of such funds in a separate fund and declaring an emergency. This is on second reading and emergency. Mr. McConnell.
Thank you, Mayor. I was asked to take a look at the question whether contribution of opioid settlement funds to existing social service programs within the county that are designed to address various issues caused by the opioid crisis. It constitutes a legitimate expenditure of those funds. I've taken a look at the materials that the guidelines or regulations that the Ohio Attorney General has generated in connection with the settlement fund, and it's my legal opinion that contribution of those funds to existing programs is a permitted use of the funds.
Okay, thank you, Mr. McConnell. Mr. Kennedy, anything that you would care to add?
We did get 2 more small distributions, beginning of this year. That's in addition to the original one that we received last year, which was a little over 2,000. One of the requirements, as outlined by the Attorney General's guidance in the auditor's state, is to account for that money in separate funds. So that's included in this legislation, and that'll help us with our auditors.
Okay, very good. Any questions? And if not, is there a motion to adopt on emergency?
Also, right there.
Thank you. We have a motion to adopt on emergency by Mrs. Blanco. Is there a second?
Seconded.
Second by Mr. Campbell. Is there any discussion on the motion? As it is on second reading, we do not need to suspend the rules. We will need 5 to pass. So, Mrs. Thomas, we call the roll.
Mrs. Sacks.
Aye.
Mrs. Blanco. Aye. Mr. Rock.
Aye.
Mrs. Wise.
Aye.
Mr. Gould.
Aye.
Mr. Cooney.
Aye.
Mr. King.
Very good. Motion carries. Next is item E, ordinance 2023-01, acknowledging and accepting the appointment of Michael E. Cicero as prosecutor and assistant law director, authorizing a contract for compensation and declaring an emergency. This is on emergency. Mr. McConaughey.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Cicero's initial contract expired as of the beginning of the year. This is essentially the same ordinance that was promulgated last year, only the term has been changed from a 1-year term to a 2-year term. The rate of pay and other terms and conditions under the ordinance have remained unchanged.
Yeah, very good. Thank you, Mr. McConaughey. Are there any questions? This is one.
Yeah, it's not a question, just basically a comment, since it's the 3rd prosecutor that, that I've been with, and I have to tell you, I think he's produced the most legislation and has been the most communicative with, city council. I know that the police chief is very happy with his work as well, and, I would be happy to,
Very good. Thank you, Mrs. Blanco.
I'd also like to add that part of review commission is very happy with this. Been very helpful on that.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Rock. There's no further comment. Is there a motion on emergency? A motion approved on emergency by Mrs. Weiss. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Second by Mrs. Blanco. Any further discussion? Seeing none, we'll take 2 votes. The first is on the suspension of rules. Mrs. Thomas.
Mrs. Sacks.
Aye.
Mrs. Blanco.
Aye.
Mr. Rock.
Aye.
Mrs. Wise.
Aye.
Mr. Gould.
Aye.
Mr. Cooney.
Aye.
Mr. King.
Aye.
Okay. And then on the main motion.
Mrs. Sacks.
Aye.
Mrs. Blanco. Aye. Mr. Rock.
Aye.
Mrs. Wise.
Aye.
Mr. Gould.
Aye.
Mr. Cooney.
Aye.
Mr. King.
Aye.
Okay, motion carries. Next is item F, ordinance 2023-02, amending codified ordinance section 276.04 entitled salaries and expenses to include the rate of pay for members of the Civil Service Commission and declaring an emergency. This is on emergency. Mr. McConaughey, Mr. Kennedy, who are we starting with here?
I can start, Mayor.
Okay,
This ordinance and the subsequent 2 are an attempt to clarify the amounts of money that we pay citizen members of these various boards and commissions. We have historically paid them on a per meeting basis. But there was no, outside of the Architectural Review Board, there was no documentation of that. At least Kelly and I could not find it over time. So this is an attempt to just codify that. So that, again, this is in deference to audit issues for us.
yes. Thank you, Mr. Kennedy. Mr. McConaughey?
And I would just add, it's really a matter of cleanup. To make things uniform across the boards and commissions. The one thing that we did spot at our staff meeting earlier this morning was that while the proposed rate and the ordinances before you that relate to planning, CA, and civil service is $100 per meeting, the rate that's currently codified for the ARB is $50. So depending on, if you approve these ordinances, you would expect to see an ARB amendment at your next meeting. We'll make sure that the rates are uniform for all board commissions.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. McConaughey. Are there any questions? And if not, is
More
there,
of a sick comment.
go ahead, Mr. Brown.
I guess this is regarding all of it, though. I was on Board of Zoning Appeals 10 years ago now. And the rate has not changed since then. So I think it's appropriate to bring us up to 2023 where the cost of living and for their time has gone up substantially. These meetings take hours and hours of time, and to compensate that, I think would be appropriate. So I look forward to passing all of these.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Mr. Brown. Mrs. Weiss.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I just kind of did a cursory review of our neighboring cities and everybody is.
Very good. Thank you, Mrs. White. Are there any further questions or comments? And if not, is there a motion to approve on emergency? A motion to approve on emergency by Mrs. Sacks. Is there a second? Takes a second then by Mrs. White. Any further discussion? Now we'll take two votes. First is on the suspension of the rules. Mrs. Thomas.
Mrs. Sacks.
Aye.
Mrs. Blanco.
Aye.
Mr. Rock.
Aye.
Mrs. Wise. Mr. Gould.
Aye.
Mr. Cooney.
Aye.
Mr. King.
Aye.
And on the main motion.
Mrs. Sacks.
Aye.
Mrs. Blanco.
Aye.
Mr. Rock.
Aye.
Mrs. Wise.
Aye.
Mr. Gould.
Aye.
Mr. Cooney.
Aye.
Mr. King.
Aye.
Very good. Motion carries. Next is item G. Ordinance 2023-03, amending codified ordinance section 1244.02 entitled Organization to include the rate of pay for members of the Board of Zoning Appeals and declaring an emergency. This is on emergency. Mr. Kennedy.
It's really the same issue here. It was, this is to codify the historical practice, so, and to, provide an increase
Okay, very good.
in meeting.
Mr. McConville, anything to add?
No, this item and the next one are just tandem items with the items you just approved. With the item, so the item you just approved, like Civil Service Commission, BZA, and Planning Commission respectively.
Okay, very good. Is there a motion to approve on emergency?
So moved again.
A very good motion by Mrs. Sacks. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Second by Mrs. Whitefeld. Any discussion? Seeing that, Mrs. Thomas will take two votes. The first is on the suspension of the rules.
Mrs. Sacks.
Aye.
Mrs. Blanco.
Aye.
Mr. Rock.
Aye.
Mrs. Wise.
Aye.
Mr. Gould.
Aye.
Mr. Cooney.
Aye.
Mr. King.
Aye.
And then on the main motion.
Mrs. Sacks.
Aye.
Mrs. Blanco.
Aye.
Mr. Rock.
Aye.
Mrs. Wise.
Aye.
Mr. Gould.
Aye.
Mr. Cooney.
Aye.
Mr. King.
Aye.
Very good, motion carries. Next is item H. Ordinance 2023-04, amending codified ordinance section 1220.01 entitled membership to include the rate of pay for members of the planning commission and declaring emergency on emergency. I think we can incorporate by reference the comments in the previous two items. Is there a motion?
So,
I'll take it from Mr. King. On emergency, regular emergency, on emergency. Is there a second, Mrs. White? Second on emergency by Mrs. White. Any discussion on the motion? We'll take two votes. First on the suspension of the rules, Mrs. Thomas.
Mrs. Sacks.
Aye.
Mrs. Blanco.
Aye.
Mr. Rock.
Aye.
Mrs. Wise. Mr. Gould.
Aye.
Mr. Cooney.
Aye.
Mr. King.
Aye.
And on the main motion.
Mrs. Sacks.
Aye.
Mrs. Blanco.
Aye.
Mr. Rock.
Aye.
Mrs. Wise.
Aye.
Mr. Gould.
Aye.
Mr. Cooney.
Aye.
Mr. King.
Aye.
And motion carries. Next is item I, ordinance 2023-05, enacting codified ordinance section 1064.021 entitled Boost Recycling Services. This is on first reading. The sponsor is Councilmember Sacks. Mrs. Sacks, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mayor. 1 year ago, I was honored with the assignment to chair University Heights Service and Utilities Committee. The most recently, the Service and Utilities Committee met on January 4th, 2023. I am proud to announce that our committee fulfilled its goal to follow up on the 2020 solid waste studies recommendation to the greatest extent that possible that the legislative branch of government can do. We look forward to working collaboratively with the mayor, service director, and administration when they present a plan to city council that incorporates the points in this legislation before us, which is in accordance with University Heights residents' expressed wishes. Striving to provide the highest level of rubbish and recycling collection customer service, the committee responded to University Heights residents' preferences as expressed in 2 surveys. Residents of University Heights, your opinion matters. We hear you. You made it very clear in both surveys that the majority of you want better recycling, improved recycling rate. The highest responses in both surveys are to maintain the current method of backyard side door collection. 63.5% in the Baldwin Wallace survey, 49% in the RRS. You indicated your preference not to reduce service personnel staffing levels. So after much discussion at the January 4th Service and Utilities Committee meeting, the committee made its unanimous decision based on the list of due diligence efforts and research described in the ordinance, noting that I toured neighboring cities, which also collect rubbish and recycling from the backyard side door, but with approximately double to triple the recycling rate than University Heights. I spoke to service directors from a dozen or so municipalities in Cuyahoga County. I met virtually with authorities at the state level and national organizations that contribute to recycling industry standards. I arranged for local professionals at several service and utility committee meetings to present on sustainable recycling measures. And I spoke with the consultant who conducted the 2020 solid waste study. I want to take a moment to be crystal clear about expenses associated with rubbish and recycling collection. City Council is very cognizant of our city's finances. So at the January 4th meeting, I presented a spreadsheet comparing the cost of rubbish and recycling collection methods. Current data from December 2022 and from the 2023 budget was used. It passed a cursory review by our finance director, attesting to the validity of the numbers. The spreadsheet demonstrates little cost difference between collection models when staffing levels are unchanged, because rubbish and recycling collection is labor-driven and labor-intensive. So I would like to take a moment to acknowledge Mr. John Pucella, University Heights veteran senior member of our service department, who addressed the city council body at the January 17th city council meeting. Prior to Mr. Pucella's presentation, council was led to believe or under the impression that the collection of loose recycling could not be done using the current method of backyard side door rubbish collection. Council appreciates Mr. Pucella's remarks as the veteran foreman in charge of rubbish and recycling collection, because he actually highlighted what he may need to get the job done. Yes, there is a path to moving away from bagged recycling without sacrificing University Heights residents' preferred method of rubbish collection. So regarding recycling in general, the goal is to increase recycling by making the transition from bagged to loose recycling collection. That is expected to result in increased recycling, no matter where it is collected, whether at the backyard, side door, or curbside. So this is one of the main reasons that additional resources may actually be needed, according to Mr. Pucella. One of the interesting things that Mr. Pucella mentioned is the need for a transfer station. So just a few comments and questions to explore perhaps in a future committee meeting. Mr. Pucella said, quote, "The transfer station is a necessity when it comes to refuse, recycle, brush, and leaf collection." This is the first time that anyone from administration mentioned the need for a transfer station, even though we've been doing brush leaf collection, for example. It has not been mentioned this entire year since I've been on council. It has not been included in the original municipal facilities assessment for the service yard or in the updated facilities assessment for the service yard. So if a transfer station could have been used for the back pile of leaves and yard waste, it was not mentioned prior to Mr. Pucella's remarks. If a transfer station is needed for loose versus bagged recycling, the reason has not been stated. So while I'm aware that Shaker Heights is a transfer station, it's unknown which other neighboring municipalities have such transfer station and the reasons for them. So it's worth hearing about. To reiterate the key point, though, that Mr. Pucella made, is that transitioning from bagged to loose recycling can happen with our current collection method. So that would require an administrative plan to accommodate the increase in recyclables collected, regardless of where the loose recycling is collected, whether at the backyard site or at the curb. I'm stating for the record that ordinance 2023-05 and the discussion regarding it relates to the current method of backyard side door rubbish and recycling collection. So based on all findings and discussions in public committee meetings, including on January 4th, 2023, the Service and Utilities Committee, consisting of Councilman Chris Cooney, Councilman Justin Gould, Councilman John Rock, voted unanimously for these three main recommendations, directives to be voted on council tonight via ordinance and enacted by the mayor and his administration. Number one, continue current rubbish and recycling collection at the backyard side door while transitioning to modernized loose recycling. So since the committee unanimously voted in this, but it isn't clearly stated in the ordinance, I am going to ask Mr. McConville to advise later on how to clarify the location in the ordinance language. Number two, administration to improve the quality of recycling and improve the percent recycling rates by reducing contaminated recyclables through opt-in sign-up. This process is to include training on correct recycling and is to be at no cost to University Heights residents who choose to voluntarily transition to loose recycling. Three, administration to obtain quotes for University Heights to purchase 32-gallon or comparable recycling bins, to provide 2 University Heights residents who opt in and sign up to modernize and improve our recycling, to support our city's transition to modernize loose recycling collection at their backyard or side door. So this ordinance is based on the expressed priorities of University Heights residents, supported by Service and Utilities Committee, which represents a majority of City Council. Excuse me a moment. I want to make it very clear that Council, through the Service and Utilities Committee, welcomes with open arms, working together with the mayor and service director and anyone else in administration who work together collaboratively to find common ground to devise a plan complete with costs for implementation. As such, a doodle poll for the Service and Utilities Committee is in process and is circulating so we can start working together. I want to take a moment to thank all who have provided opinions and insights throughout the past year, especially those who attended our meeting on January 4th and engaged in constructive discussion. I want to thank Mr. John Pucella for his comments and insights. And I'm proud to announce that our committee fulfilled its goal, following up on the 2020 Solid Waste Studies recommendation to the greatest extent, to move and shift from a policy debate to a way, a path forward to achieve our goals together in a thoughtful, constructive, collaborative, and expeditious manner. So now I would like to call the question to make a motion to pass ordinance 2023-05, noting there would be time for discussion after the motion has been seconded. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mrs. Sack. Sorry, did you just make a motion?
I'm calling for a motion. Does that mean I'm making the motion or I'm asking for someone
I
on
don't
the
know.
floor? I think that Mr. McConville first, I've asked for him to give us some language to reflect what I just said.
Yeah, I mean, we just know this was listed on the agenda as first reading and there's no emergency language in here, but Mr. McConville, sounds like there's some questions. So maybe I will give you.
Right, procedurally, you're correct, Mayor, the ordinance has been introduced without emergency language. If the ordinance is to be considered, not on emergency, it would necessarily have to go through 2 readings before passage, and then upon passage, it would become effective 30 days after adoption. Council can, by motion, move to amend the ordinance. Included within any amendment of the ordinance could be the addition of an emergency clause. And that would be permissible as long as you are specifying what the emergency is that justifies passage on 1 reading. But that would have to be done by amendment. In connection with the substantive issue that was raised, specifying backyard or side yard pickup, I believe that it is within council's purview to be as specific as they want to be in connection with the expenditure of taxpayer dollars, and that you would simply add a phrase in all likelihood to subsection B, indicating that loose recycling services shall be offered by means of backyard and or side yard pickup.
Were you done?
Wait, can you say that line again? For subsection B.
Yes, subsection B currently reads, the city shall offer loose recycling services to residents and occupants of residential dwellings. I think you could make a substantive amendment by adding a sentence to that subsection that reads, loose recycling services shall be offered by means of backyard and or side yard pickup.
Sorry, was that a separate clause or that would sub out of letter B? The structure of what you just said is different than the structure currently.
I'm not sure I am following your question exactly, but let me try to answer it this way.
Maybe just repeat it.
Subsection B would read in its entirety with an amendment as follows. The city shall offer loose recycling services to residents and or occupants of residential dwellings. Loose recycling services shall be offered by means of backyard and or side yard pickup.
I'll make a motion to make that amendment.
Mrs. Thomas, did you get the phrasing? Can you read it back for me, please?
The city shall offer loose recycling services to residents and or occupants of residential dwellings. Loose recycling services by measures of backyard or side yard.
The second sentence says loose recycling services shall be offered by means of backyard and or side yard pickup.
Thank you, Mrs. Thomas. Thank you, Mr. McConnell. Mr. King. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yes.
Oh, that's right. There is a motion on the floor by Mr. Gould and who second? By Mrs. Blankfeld. We have the second by Mrs. Blankfeld to make this amendment. Is there discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, Mrs. Thomas, will you call the roll on the amendment?
Mrs. Sacks.
Aye.
Mrs. Blanco.
Aye.
Mr. Rock.
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss.
Aye.
Mr. Gould.
Aye.
Mr. Cooney.
Right.
Mr. King.
Nay.
Okay, the amendment passes. Floor is open, Mr. King.
I think, I asked if discussion could be after the second motion on the ordinance.
There's only one motion.
You have to make a motion.
Oh, I make a motion to pass, I'll make the wording, to pass an emergency. To pass a, no, not an emergency.
First
First reading, first. The ordinance 2023-05, enacting codified entitled loose recycling services.
You don't have to make a motion. pass it on. Since I thought you were going
How-
for
how-
emergency, but if you don't, then it's just, we have discussion and then it's done on first reading.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for clarifying. This is my first rodeo here.
Very good. So there's no motion at this time. Thank you. Mr. King, I did recognize you previously. You may now.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. All right. I'd like to start by thanking Mrs. Sachs for her work on the subject of the past year. As stated in the ordinance on the first reading this evening, she reviewed results of 2 surveys, reports from GT Environmental, Cuyahoga County Solid Waste District, and the Recycling Partnership. She also invited industry experts from the Solid Waste District and Kimball to speak before the Services and Utilities Committee. Additionally, she had conversations with numerous service directors across the county and participated in site visits to other municipal facilities. Thank you for your diligence, Mrs. Sachs. I agree with almost everything that was written in this ordinance. It just changed. I wasn't prepared to address that. But tonight, I'd like to focus on the opt-in aspect of this ordinance. Mrs. Sachs cited the Recycling Partnership's 2020 State of the Curbside Recycling Report in her research. I first quoted this report during the April 4th meeting of this body. Elizabeth Biggins Raymer, Executive Director of the Cuyahoga County Solid Waste District, presented to us on the subject on the state recycling practices, in the county, as well as industry as a whole. Chapter 2 of this report is titled Local Curbside Program Performance. In this chapter, there are 2 tables that are relevant to this topic. First, I'd like to discuss its title, Pounds per Household Curbside Program Performance by Type of Container. The table states that communities that use bags for recycling collection on average collect 324 pounds per year. For bins, 360 pounds per year. Those think the 18-gallon tubs. And 458 pounds for wheeled carts. Let me break those numbers down. Bins average 36 pounds more than bags. Carts average 98 pounds. Difference between bags and carts was 134 pounds. You can see this is a dramatic difference in results. The Recycling Partnership also recognizes this disparity. From the report, the roughly 100-pound or almost 28% difference underscores that moving the bin-based programs to carts is still an enormously important strategy for improving the performance of U.S. curbside recycling services. The difference between bag-based and cart-based collection is even more pronounced and indicates substantial opportunity to increase material capture. Perhaps these numbers may have helped persuade Mrs. Sachs that loose recycling was the right direction for our city. The numbers certainly are compelling. However, I mentioned there was another part in this chapter. It is titled Average and Median Pounds per Household per Surveyed Community Curbside Programs. This is where my confusion begins. This chart states that opt-in programs collect on average 331 pounds against programs with automatically provided services. That's to mean universal. Those collect 459 pounds. That is a difference of 128 pounds. Numbers are very similar to the previous chart where carts yield better results than that. From the report, requiring households to opt in is a detriment to the material capture. The conversion of opt-in programs in the U.S. is universal service would address this shortcoming. Given these findings, I struggle to understand how Mrs. Sachs arrived at the conclusion that opt-in recycling would be best in University Heights. Let's turn to other cities within the county that have opt-in recycling programs. There is only one. That is according to the county, or the Cuyahoga County Solid Waste District. That is the city of Cleveland, and Cleveland has very different circumstances from our own. They adopted an opt-in program as a drastic measure that catastrophic levels of contamination. According to then Cleveland Chief of Operations, Darnell Brown, the rate of contamination was 68%. He stated that Cleveland City Council, if 68% of your product is going to a landfill, you don't really have a recycling program. I find it hard to disagree with that statement. Point is, we are not Cleveland and do not have a problematic level of contamination, and therefore do not share in their reasoning for an opt-in program. On May 4th of last year, representatives from Kimball, the operators of our material recovery facility, presented to the Services and Utilities Committee. At this meeting, Don Johnson, our business development manager, stated that he was not aware of any contamination issues from University Heights. Again, the reason for the only other city in the county to have an opt-in program, astronomical levels of contamination, does not apply to University Heights. Another practical aspect to consider with opt-in programs are administrative and operational issues. By their very nature, you must track unique households that have opted into the service. At first glance, this seems like a feature. Only residents who want to take the time to recycle will participate. In practice, creation and maintenance of the list adds to administrative overhead. Who does this work? What do we do, or what do we do when a new resident requests service? Do we just add them? Mrs. Sachs has frequently cited that our rubbish collection could be made more efficient by updating the routes. I agree that revisiting routes may be a worthwhile endeavor. One of the primary issues with opt-in programs is that route changes every time a resident signs up. Today, we have a universal program. Our Kubota drivers drive up every driveway and collect each household. With opt-in, not only do we have administratively maintaining the list, but we must make an operational change by continually updating the routes. Efficiency is gained through standardization, not creating exceptions. Opt-in programs also create issues with economies of scale. With universal service, we would just order 4,278 carts plus a small reserve. What do we do with opt-in? Only order enough carts for those who sign up. What do we do when a new resident requests service? Order small batches of carts at a higher cost per unit. Where do we store this inventory? If we're going to order a cart for every household, it would be more cost effective to do that upfront. Again, efficiency is gained through standardization, not creating exceptions. Finally, we know that recycling is important to the vast majority of University Heights residents. The University Heights Solid Waste Service Community Survey, prepared by the Baldwin Wallace Community Research Institute, found that 88% of respondents consider recycling important. The University Heights Residential Rubbish and Recycling Collection Survey, prepared by Resource Recycling System, found that 84% of residents consider recycling important. Furthermore, the Recycling Partnership's 2020 State of Curbside Recycling Report states that 84% of Americans view recycling as a valuable public service. Support for recycling is strong in University Heights and across the nation as a whole. In light of this data, why would we choose to implement an opt-in recycling program that would limit access to service that residents demand? To reiterate, I've discussed the subpar results of opt-in recycling. The fact that no other city in the county, other than the city of Cleveland, has chosen opt-in. The administrative and operational overhead of opt-in. And with over 80% of University Heights residents in support of recycling. These numbers don't justify opt-in. Opt-out, that might make more sense.
Thank you, Mr. King. Floor is open. If there is no further comment, we can consider this first reading to be had. But I want to make sure that we have heard from everyone before we do.
I can address some of those things. I may.
Sure, Mrs. Sack. ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor. So just to clarify a few things. First of all, I look forward to working together and Service and Utilities Committee because you bring up a lot of interesting points, Mr. King. The first thing is to differentiate between recycling desert as opposed to curbside. Curbside is a word for household, whether or not it's at the curb or in the backyard sidewalk. I spoke to people at the recycling partnership who verified that. Okay, it's as opposed to not having recycling or not having access. We actually have a premium type of curbside recycling on our properties. That's number one.
I was talking about opt-in.
I'll get there. I'm going one by one, but you. The other thing is regarding just the sidewalk backyard, which you started off in that area. I will not ignore our residents' preference for that. So that's what this is, the location. As far as citing the solid waste district reports, the recycling partnership, in our county, when we look at from 2020 to 2021, the solid waste district's annual report, where everybody pretty much except for 3 or 4 of us out of 59 their trash is collected at the curb, including recycling. 48% did worse, went in the negative from 2020 to 2021 in terms of their percent recycling rate without yard waste. 71% had no change or worse. So the data is not supporting improvement at the curbside with the automated or those types of collections. Don't want to get too deep in the weeds. We can do that in the committee meeting if you wish to talk about that more. But the data is just not there to support that. As far as pinball, they don't do audits. So he's not aware of our contamination rate because Mr. Johnson, with all due respect, that's not part of their service. And finally, regarding the 85% respondents to the survey, yes, we agree. The overwhelming majority of those who responded do want improved recycling. That's not to be confused with the number of households that actually voluntarily currently participate. I talked to Mr. Pucella after, and he can come back and speak in a public forum rather than one-on-one. But I asked him approximately how many households do currently voluntarily participate in recycling. I've asked administration many times, can you just count the bags? Can you just, from Monday through Thursday, we can have an idea, and you can do that seasonally, just have an idea. And Mr. Pucella said 25% of our households had food bags. So that's, well, the majority of the people took the time, not the majority. The majority of respondents of nice amounts of people, statistically significant number of people responded favorably to wanting to recycle. The actual number of households that are currently participating is 25%. And I would bet, like myself before this year, were wishful recyclers. So opting in is an excellent opportunity to train and move forward. And I might also add, in a communication from the recycling partnership, I'll always tell you, if the community can't provide this type of recycling, then opt-in is a good option. We'll rather see opt-in recycling than no curbside recycling, which means it doesn't. If the community can't provide carts, then bins can work. But we'd rather see bins than no curbside recycling. As we spoke this morning, we talked about goals for your community choices, and how you can best achieve them. All of these options and choices are viable. They may just deliver different results. We need to start in a way where we can really identify who wants to volunteer, who wants to do recycling, and who wants to do it correctly. And that's an opportunity to train and to give them the tools they need. I think more discussion can be had in committee, and I welcome that. I welcome that from members of council and administration to put our heads together to figure out the best way to move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Sacks. Mr. King.
I'll just reiterate what I stated about having so opt-in programs just don't perform as well as programs that are universal. The numbers don't lie on that.
Perhaps on an average in the country, but
Mrs.
not.
Sacks, would you like the floor? I have one, Mr. King, if you don't.
I don't know what else to say. I do not agree that we should have an opt-in program. We would be the only one other than Cleveland in this county. And I don't think we have the same reasons to say.
Okay, thank you, Mr. King. Mrs. Sacks, do you want the floor?
I think that's fine. I look forward to continued discussion on how to move forward.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Mrs. Sacks. Any further discussion? Well, we'll consider this first reading had. I understand that doodle poll is out with regard to the committee meetings. So I think the intention here is to have a committee meeting before we see this.
We'll see. I think I was waiting for your response. So, we'll. Beautiful.
Most of those dates weren't good, but
Okay.
we will,
So we'll.
I haven't seen
Look at it tomorrow when I'm a little more clear-minded.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Mrs. Sacks.
Mayor,
Yes.
Mr. Gould, I'd like to make a motion to amend the agenda to have two items that were discussed at the safety committee meeting. I apologize, I didn't see that they weren't on the agenda, and I noticed now that I should have brought them up when we were adding things on. But motion that I'd like to implement. That is to add a motion to approve the fire and police electrical contract not to exceed $25,000, not to exceed $26,000 on the recommendation of the safety committee and on the emergency being maintaining a fire and police force who are well trained and abreast of the advances and developments in regulation and guidance.
Just to clarify one point, if you're contemplating adopting a contract approval like that one by motion, you don't need an emergency clause. So.
Do by motion.
Okay. All right, so I didn't get all that, Mr. Gould, but the gist of what I got was that we would have a new letter and I presume a motion to approve.
Fire and police electrical contract not to exceed $26,000 on recommendation of the safety committee.
Slightly out of order compared to what you said, but I have written down motion to approve flexible contracts for police and fire. In an amount not to exceed $26,000 on recommendation of safety committee? Yes, okay. So we have a motion to add that to the agenda by Mr. Gould. Is there a second? Second by Mrs. Wise. Any discussion? Mrs. Thomas, we call the roll.
Mrs. Sacks.
Aye.
Mrs. Langell.
Aye.
Mr. Rock.
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss.
Aye.
Mr. Gould.
Aye.
Mr. Cooney.
Aye.
Mr. King.
Aye.
Okay, so that will be the new letter M. Mr. Gould, you have a second.
Yes, Mayor, thank you. I believe we're going to do a rebid on this agenda. We should put the GPD item on. I wanted to make sure we came from safety, but I thought,
Oh,
we didn't have it on. I didn't want to put it on and you didn't want it on, but I thought the GPD motion should probably go on as well.
that's the motion regarding the restricted.
Correct.
Yeah, we may as well go ahead and do that.
Okay, so I'll make a motion to amend the agenda to add motion to approve GPD recommendation to rebid. I guess I should, I'm gonna rephrase that, strike that. Motion to authorize GPD to rebid the annual pavement park program for 20. On recommendation of the city.
That's the motion.
Yes.
I'll second
Seconded.
the motion.
Okay, so I have a motion to authorize GPD to rebid the annual pavement remarking program for 2023 upon recommendation of the safety committee. Motion by Mr. Gould and the second by Mrs. Sacks.
No,
Oh,
Mr. King.
Mr. King, okay. I heard a couple of them. All right, very good. Any discussion on this additional agenda item? Mrs. Thomas, we call the roll.
Mrs. Sacks.
Aye.
Mrs. Langell.
Aye.
Mr. Rock.
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss.
Aye.
Mr. Gould.
Aye.
Mr. Cooney.
Aye.
Mr. King.
Aye.
Okay, very good. That will be the new item code. Okay, we are now on item J, which is ordinance 2023-06, amending codified ordinance section 220.11 entitled Order of Business by moving reports and communication of directors up on the agenda and declaring an emergency. This is on emergency. Mrs. Weiss is the sponsor. Mrs. Weiss, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Coming out of an economic and development meeting, one of our directors mentioned that in other cities, the directors' reports are actually at the beginning of the agenda. So if they do not have any agenda items, they are free to leave. And we actually thought that this was a good idea. I spoke to a number of other cities and many others have that also. I think many of our directors will be happy with this change. I don't see any conflict. Obviously, if there is an agenda item for a director, they will stay until their agenda item is discussed. But I would like to move this right after the council reports.
Okay, very good. Well, is there a motion?
I feel.
So, Mrs. Weiss, were you wrapping that up to a motion to approve on emergency?
Yes, I'll make a motion to approve.
Okay, very good. We have a motion by Mrs. Weiss, a second then by Mrs. Blanco. Any discussion on the motion? Okay. Then we'll go ahead and take two votes. Mrs. Thomas, first on the suspension of the rule.
Mrs. Sacks.
Aye.
Mrs. Langell.
Aye.
Mr. Rock.
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss.
Aye.
Mr. Gould.
Aye.
Mr. Cooney.
Aye.
Mr. King.
Aye.
And then on the main motion.
Mrs. Sacks.
Aye.
Mrs. Langell.
Aye.
Mr. Rock.
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss.
Aye.
Mr. Gould.
Aye.
Mr. Cooney.
Aye.
Mr. King.
Aye.
Okay, very good. Motion carries. Mrs. Thomas, for the next meeting, we'll change the order. Very good. Thank you. Next is item K, ordinance 2023-07, amending codified ordinance sections 212.01 entitled contracting procedures and 212.02 entitled professional contracts, unique services and or supplies, and declaring an emergency. This is on emergency. And Vice, you are again responsible. Beautiful.
Yes, thank you, Mary. This ordinance originally appeared almost a year ago. Discussing the need for large professional service contracts with 2,000 and over to be competitively bid out. We paused this because there was a request that the engineering piece be discussed further in a small working group. That working group was effectively staffed by the mayor. However, this ordinance came back to finance after an economic development committee meeting with the city engineer, discussing the different nuances of how this could look in an ordinance. That is not the only piece in here. We have different legal contracts in here as well as also any other type of professional services regarding it's basically legal services and any other professional contracts, $50,000 or more. I don't know if the law director wants to expound on anything.
Well, before I recognize the law director, I'd like a clarification. When you say that the working group is effectively stopped by the mayor, what do you mean?
There were more sessions that were to be had, and you proposed an ordinance on the agenda whereby it took away our city engineers as an individual and needed a company. So we were not done in that working group. In fact, Mr. Tooney and I were working on something, and we just didn't have another meeting yet because we're in the middle.
Well, I think he stated that we were under the impression that we were in a 1-year contract. And we were at the end of 2022. And we were under the impression we needed to pass a new contract for 2023. So the ordinance that appeared was to appoint Mr. Tooney, or as it would later turn out to be GPD Group, because that's what GPD Group requested. Let me finish, to have a contract for 2023. It was only on subsequent examination we discovered that Mr. Tooney had actually signed a 2-year contract through 2020. The only reason I had taken action was because though the working group wasn't done, we needed to have a city engineer in 2023. And it was everybody's recollection, myself, Mr. Tooney, Mr. McConville, and everyone involved, that we were at the end of the contract and needed to do something to renew it. In fact, we even came before the council and ended up negotiating and getting a motion for an extension of time on the existing 2022 contract, believing that we were at the end of the term. So, I didn't stop negotiations or discussion. We were simply looking at the calendar and under the mistaken belief that we were at the end of the contract.
So that's untrue. The council would have extended Mr. Tooney's contract anyways until the working group was finished. The working group was not finished. We were very clear it wasn't finished, and we were actually almost at the end. And I think we would have had a really great outcome with our lay citizens that were part of that. But because that was halted, we had a very robust committee meeting with Mr. Tooney present. And we went through many nuances and different scenarios. We value Mr. Tooney. And we value his work and we want him to stay. And he does have that, he's contracted through the end of the year, but this professional service ordinance was also was discussed in committee last week, and it seemed everybody was on board with this and wished it to go forward. So that's why.
Well, I was at that committee meeting. Mr. Tooney was not at that committee meeting. And what I stated at that committee meeting was I had not had an opportunity to review what I believe were changes to the professional services ordinance based upon the several working group meetings that we had. There don't appear to be any changes at all. So I think we need to go back and have another look at this. I would suggest whether it's done within the confines of the committee or resuming the working group that we go ahead and do that. I don't believe that this reflects any of the work that you were describing, but any of the breakthroughs that you say you had with Mr. Chin.
So Mayor, I specifically asked if there were any comments in that committee meeting. This ordinance was sent out weeks before the committee meeting, and you did not say anything. So there was ample time for discussion. As I mentioned before, Mr. Chun, discussed in depth, discussed this in depth, actually, this specific thing. I'm not really
Well,
aware of any.
where are the changes then in this ordinance compared to the one from last summer that reflect the changes made? Advanced and discussed on the working.
The working group was halted, and there was no definitive outcome of that because of you.
I did not
So-
halt the working group.
Yes, you-
I did not, and I'm willing to go to a working group meeting yet. You haven't scheduled any more.
Maybe we should pull the minutes out from the meeting when you presented a GPP contract instead of a tuning contract. And then we can, I'm pretty sure that you called it, trying to think of the adjective was, what you called the working. Group. It wasn't a waste of time, it was something more harsh than that. But you stopped the working group. So this is the contract that is on the table right now, and this is the contract that you had ample time to comment on last.
I just want to be clear, you cannot point to any changes that have been made based upon the working group discussions. This is an identical ordinance to the one from last year.
Legal pieces in here that are different. And
Such as,
there is a line about the union contracts in here. That is different that we, that Mr. Pondle and I discussed. And in terms of any professional services with our engineer, there is no different details in here. However, Mr. Chuney made it public that he plans on retiring in the next couple of months. And it will not be his expertise here any longer. So this was a fair representation of what a professional service engineering contract would look like, because the assumption is it will be above $50,000.
okay, that wasn't discussed with them. And that's not reflected. I mean, the things that we discussed in the working group are not reflected here. This is basically the same ordinance that was proposed and put before us. So we had all those meetings, we went over all those things, and now we're where we were in the beginning.
Make a motion to approve ordinance 2023-06.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion to approve. I see Mr. Chun is raising his hand, so we will continue the discussion. We have a motion approved by Mr. Gould. Second, was that on
Yes.
emergency, and a second by Mr. Rock. And Mr. Chin, you before.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, council. I was kind of blindsided by this ordinance here. I don't understand how it's actually going to work. I came to a meeting the day after I buried my father. And we had a discussion about the proposed city engineering contract that was proposed that was never passed. And we talked about city engineers' duties versus additional services by DPD. And that was the main discussion that whole night. We talked about it. And I left that meeting with the understanding we were going to have another another meeting to discuss exactly how that would work, right? Practically, how does it work? And then this came out. So if I'm going to do my job here and I'm going to continue as your engineer, I have to understand how this works. I'm talking about specifically Exhibit B, right? It's in part of this ordinance. And the title of it is professional contracts, unique services and supplies. But everybody is accepted out except for the engineer. So it's obvious what this is doing, right? Because the law director's not there. I mean, you had two contracts here today with consultants that didn't get any public bidding, any other prices as this it talks about, but it was passed tonight. So I understand that, what's going on here, but I need to understand how this is going to work. Specifically, the line here, in the one paragraph, the mayor or the mayor's designee shall recommend to council the best bid proposal. I'm not going to give you a legal opinion on bidding, engineering services versus quality-based selection. That's for your law director to do. All right. But the mayor or the mayor's designee, who is that person? What is the infrastructure in place to do that? To send out, to prepare an RFP, to collect them all, to review them all, to interview the candidates, and then to present it to council. who the best person is for the job. I don't know who that is or how that's gonna work, okay? That's not in my contract, it's part of my engineering duties, that's not written down that way. And I don't know if that was expected of me or not. But, you know, I would prefer to bid, or to submit a proposal for the work versus being the one that prepares the work and interviews people and recommends them for the job. Right? And I think I made that clear at that meeting, and I said, you gotta be careful what you're asking for your city engineer to do, right? If you're not gonna give him the work. Because we don't do business that way in the 22 other cities that we represent. And, you know, I'm not sure I want to do business that way if this gets passed. So I don't know if there's a clarification here on how it's going to work, or is it all on the mayor? Is he going to be doing that? Is he going to be preparing the RFPs, analyzing them, reading through them, interviewing the candidates, and then bringing it back to you?
And I just would like to offer a comment. I guess a couple things. The first is, the ordinance is, modeled after an ordinance that exists in Shaker Heights. Shaker Heights has a, very, very similar procedure as it relates to, engineering design services that, are above $50,000. There is, however, a material difference in the way Shaker Heights is structured as compared to University Heights, and that difference is that they have an on-staff full-time engineer. And so all of the tasks that Mr. Chudy is referencing in his comments would presumably be performed by that full-time employee and or his or her staff. I believe that there are some pragmatic issues that are being raised that ought to be discussed again, notwithstanding the fact that a committee meeting was held last week where no comment was offered on the ordinance. And certainly understandably that may generate some frustration, but I think there are some practical aspects to what's being required under the ordinance that should be fleshed out a little bit and discussed further prior to passage.
Okay, thanks for just piggyback one item off of that. The other material change between Shaker Heights and University Heights is threshold, and which Shaker Heights requires if you publicly led for a threshold above 25,000. We're asking that to be 50,000 for an RFQ or RFP process. So it's really twice as much for Shaker.
Correct.
Thanks, Brad. Mrs. Weiss, go ahead.
So, Mr. Tooney, I want to give you the benefit of the doubt that you did not see the agenda item at the finance meeting for the professional services contract.
Right.
I have no problem putting it into committee one more time for you so we can flesh out how this would look. The contracting for the $50,000 and above would stay, but everything else in between is kind of how is kind of what you're thinking, how that process, correct?
And how does it work above 50,000? Who's doing this? Who's the person at the city that's going to prepare the RFQ or RFP? Who's going to review it? Who's going to interview the candidates? Who's going to present it to council? I mean, is that you're asking me to do that? And that's not in my job description.
So this is.
Well, I'm gonna say your contract is very vague, but understandably so. The role of the city engineer is to have the city back and prepare for council and the administration to review potential projects that we should pursue. Put together documents for potential bidders. In this case, we're going to say maybe even pre-qualified list of vendors to prepare a proposal to do said work. Anything over $50,000, that's not just really our rule, that's the state of Ohio. So we're really modeling off that, the state of Ohio, what they require the professional services to be. And again, your role as a city engineer is to have our back. It's to review the contracts with the other design professionals and let us know if there's something out there that just doesn't look right. If they're asking for an additional service, it's your job to question that. And if you do that from the lens of having the city's back. If a contractor is doing something out of conformance of the design documents, it's your job to point that out. If they have a change order, it's your job to have the city's back and explain as to why that may or may not be the best interest of the city. So for you to say that this should just be design work handed to the design engineer, that's not what it's not what I interpreted the role of the city engineer to do, is to be the design engineer. I've always assumed the role of city engineer is that of the project manager or the owner's rep for the city to make sure these projects are, on time, on budget. But you're not doing the work, you're reviewing the work. You are doing the contract with those who are doing the work. You're the city's owner's representative in that case. So to say that you're gonna get all design work, I don't see why we would do that, especially since the state of Ohio prohibits.
That's interesting, Mr. Rock.
Cheney, why don't you go ahead?
I mean, you don't think I have the city back since 1992?
Well, there's
When I don't have the city, I don't have the city's interest at heart,
well, I could
Let
even
Mr. Cheney speak.
because, that's your opinion, okay? I am not interested in the job, if that's what you're gonna make it do, right? I have a 90-day clause in my contract, I could give it to the mayor tomorrow. As I told the mayor this afternoon, I would not leave you without a city engineer. It takes you 4 or 5 months to hire somebody else. That's fine, I'll stay, but I'm gonna give you my 90-day.
Mr. Gould, yeah.
Mr. Cheney? In relation to the bidding out of different projects, I just trying to get some clarification from you on how you see the other bids as different than, for instance, the striping project. And so, for instance, you talked about it being in your contract or not, and are you expecting me to do this as part of my job description? So I was just looking at like the letter that you wrote regarding the striping project specifically.
Correct.
And how there was an additional $5,000 that we're paying you to prepare the bid documents for the project, go out, and I'm assuming you review those as they come back. And
That's correct.
and in that way, there's some consideration, payment for that work and the lift that's required to prepare those and go out to bid. And I just wanted to understand better. I understand that there's a separate concern that I think was shared in committee about the way this might work with the financial incentive. Very angry about financial incentive for a company like GPD to accept work from the city, like the size of University Heights, if they're not going to get the financial benefit of being able to listen to these things, and that you thought that we better consider, I think was the way it was described to me in summer. I wasn't able to join the meeting, but you better reconsider the way you want to do that, because I don't know that you're going to be able to get an engineering company to accept you as a client if you're going to make them do this. So I just wanted to understand those two things. One, is there not a way that if there are additional responsibilities of going out to bid, that you can send us a letter like this saying, okay, this is the issue. We're going out to bid for this according to this ordinance, and here's the price for doing that.
Well, it's two different issues. So you're talking about a contractor versus design and professional service, right? And that's my job, all right, to tell you and to recommend to you, all right, that you shouldn't take the striping contract from the guy last year, right? If prices were too high, I'm recommending we go out for bids to get better prices. Right? That's my job. They have the city's back, if you will. All right. That's different than design professional services. And I can tell you, we don't do business any other place like than the business model you have right now. And that's the one that we signed up for and we agreed to. And I think Mr. McConville can tell you that he represents other cities and it's done exactly the same way. Okay, you hire it enough. The mayor has a spending threshold, right? And any contract of mine that would be a design over that threshold, it should come to council. It should be approved by council. I have no interest in it, right? But if you're going to expect me as part of my job to go out and get grants, which is my job, and I think I'm pretty good at it. We've gotten several grants for the city, but then I can't do the design. I'm going to then manage somebody else doing that grant, and bring them in to do the work. I'm not interested in doing that, sir. I'm just not interested in doing it.
And that comes
We
down,
were very successful. GPD is very good at getting grants. We get it for our clients all over the county, all over the state of Ohio. All right, with the understanding that, you know, we're going to design the project.
so
And everybody does that. I'm still, Chagrin Valley Engineering, Lansing and Associates, CT Consultant, they all do the same thing. We're the most public of anybody, engineers, and our fees and our records and everything are so public, everybody knows it. We all do it the same way. Right, so I don't understand what we're trying to do here. Your business model is a Parma, is a Lakewood, where they have a city engineer on staff, and that's what he does then. All right, he sends out RFPs and manages the design work coming in, because he's only one guy, or maybe he only has two guys. Doesn't have a survey crew, doesn't have inspectors, doesn't have this, doesn't have that. Okay, and he's full-time on staff, which is Mr. McConnell indicated that Shaker has. And that's a business model that I live with, yes, and we're at Shaker, but you know, if you're asking me to come in and do that job for $12,000 a year, it's not gonna happen, right? It's not. I'm not gonna do it. And you're welcome to try and get somebody else to do it. I'm not saying no one will do it. Maybe somebody will, right? And I wish you luck.
so,
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
so to understand, I think the question that I had was, it seems like what I'm understanding Mr. Rock to say is that, you know, we identify this issue of your company benefiting from the assignment of the design work and the professional services. And what you're saying is, yeah, of course we're benefiting because I'm doing the job for $12,000 and you're not going to find somebody to cut that part out. It's part and parcel of what my expectation is, or the company's expectation is, to profit from the agreement. And this is substantially different in the practical application of other cities that have a model like this, because they have in-house engineering.
Correct.
And so the thing that's being identified and is publicly been called out as a conflict of interest, right? You are assigning that work. It's actually something that you are acknowledging. I'm not trying to back you into a corner or suggest it, but I'm just making sure that I'm understanding this. I think what I'm hearing you say is, yes, of course I understand it. There is a profit to the company that I represent as a result of the assignment of those professional services, which in our total understanding of the payment, the consideration, the benefit to us from accepting this $12,000 contract, it is what we, the part and parcel of the deal. Am I understanding that right? Because I'm fine with that. If that's what you're saying, I just want to understand. That's what I'm.
That's correct.
Okay.
And all businesses are in any business to profit.
Sure. So one of the things that I have an issue with, just in the way that this has gone down, is the issue that Vice Mayor Weiss highlighted at the beginning, is that I feel like the process of this collaborative working group is thwarted. And now I'm frustrated, and I don't want to do anything in my frustration that pushes you away from the table, because I do think you have the city's back, and I think that you are the best, person to do this job right now. And I appreciated that this was something that you would agree to do for this next year. Mr. McConville, when it comes to this, the portion that would apply to Mr. Cheney from this, one of the things that I'm aware of is that Mr. Cheney has a contract. Things are going the way they are. He's agreed to do this for the remainder of the current contract that he has. And if we activate this, I want to get this passed tonight. However, I would be willing to amend it so that the issues that Mr. Cheney takes issue with aren't in effect immediately, that they don't go into effect until the December 31st, 2023, or until amended, because I want to go back to the working group or the committee, but I refuse to allow the passage of this, which has been waiting for so long, to be thwarted, because I'm just not going to meet with you. We're not going to do that work. That working group is whatever the adjective of the work was used by the mayor to describe it. And so what I'm trying to do, Mr. Cheney, is to balance the fact that I'm very frustrated right now, but I very much respect your work and your history with the city. So if there was a way that Mr. McConville was able to delay that application of that portion to your work until we're able to go back to committee and get this dealt with, do you have an immediate concern otherwise with the wording of the ordinance?
Again, I don't know practically how you do this ordinance.
Sure.
How does it work? If that would be explained, maybe I would understand a little better.
So
I don't know practically how it works. I mean, if you're going to say it's not going to take effect till next year, then I continue to do business as usual, I'm okay.
Sure.
But I still don't understand, if you pass this, it's an ordinance, right? It becomes a codified ordinance.
Well, we
It's
can
something
make it
that can
effective.
change. Yeah, that's something you take late.
So,
And you've had something in place that's worked for a lot of years. And now you're making a change.
sure. From my perspective, it hasn't worked. And I'm upset with, I'm upset by it, and I don't want it to continue that way. And I want us to go out for more things. So for instance, tonight, the conversation that I had about, for instance, the contract with the lobbyist. Was like, I don't understand how these people just continue to show up and get on our agendas without any discussion about the history, who else to be considered, what other groups are out there. And I think in this case, the reason I ended up voting for it, to answer your question, kind of you raised this as an issue, there are other contracts on the agenda. I thought it was a really good deal, like 10,000, I get to see the work, and I don't know that anyone else would do that. I've never heard of that business model, and it sounded intriguing to me. But to answer your question, I did take issue, and I've raised one-on-one with at least one of my council colleagues that I take issue with a $10,000 or $30,000 contract coming onto our agenda without it going to bid. I don't like that about the way we do business here. And it needs to change, and it's needed to change, in my view, for over a year. And I appreciate the working group that was in progress, and it didn't get the work done. And eventually, at the end of the day, even though it was making progress, and because of that, I want this to pass tonight. But I would like to ask the law director what can be done to lay the portions that Mr. Cheney is specifically raising as it applies to his work. Mr. McConnell.
Well, I suppose you can add language to the ordinance that indicates that E-1202 will not become effective until January 1 of 24.
As the black we say, as it applies to the engineer.
Well, I have some
So
concerns.
that,
about
that I would need to think about. I need to give that some thought. I don't know that you can just delay a single section or a single provision. I think you would need to rework the ordinance first in order to do that.
Okay, thank you, Mr. McConville. Mr. Rock.
Okay, for one thing, I want to clarify a remark when I'm talking about having the city back. When I say that, I mean, if you are doing work with GPD, the GPD would be doing the design work. What would happen if there's a conflict? For instance, if there's an error or omission, who would you represent? Would you represent the city or would you represent GPD? If there happens to be a claim, who would you represent, GPD or the city? And that's what I'm talking about, having the city back, because we need our city engineer to have our back, not their company back, but their shareholders. So that's something that's very important to us, and I just want to clarify what I meant by that. I'm okay including language in here about a date for January, but there are certain components in here that are really important that we have to have passed today. For instance, the $15,000 spending authority. I've never once seen a GPD contract except for the facilities assessment for passage. So there are contracts that were over 15,000. I've never seen it. That has to happen. We have to see that there is a spending authority that the mayor has to honor, and he has to bring contracts before us to approve. So this cleans that up. I don't want to put a date on that. That needs to happen immediately. The $50,000 threshold, that's an Ohio or revised code. That's something that has to be on here as soon as possible. So those two things, now the paragraph with between the 15 and the 50 have to be flexible because we're in the middle of a contract. That's something I can be a little flexible with. Two other components, it just cannot be, it just gives me extreme heartburn.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Rock. Mr. Cheney.
Yes, Mr. Rock, I'd like to respond.
Yeah.
My father told me many years ago, always tell the truth because you'll remember what you said. And I think about that. If you tell the truth, you'll always remember what you said. Because when you tell lies, you don't remember which lie you told, right? And I have always told the truth. There's never been an issue with me with errors or omissions, okay, with this city. All right, I'd like you to go back in history and find one if you can, all right? I do not run away from my mistakes. If I make mistakes, I bring it to the mayor's attention, right? And I own up to it and I pay for it, if that's what it takes. All right, it always happens. It's happened with GPD, it's happened with me personally. all right? That's the kind of person I am. I mean, you may not trust me, I get that, all right? But I have no, my history speaks for itself here, all right? And I don't know why that would be an issue. As
Well,
long
I
as I'm
don't-
standing here.
I don't review your work, you review your work. So if there is a mistake in your work, you're the one to see it and correct it. That's the job of the city engineers. Now, when you see other cities have a city engineer on payroll, that we do too. We have you. You are an employee of the city. You get W-2. Okay, you get pensions. You are an employee of the city. And when you say there are other cities that have people on their payroll that do this, we do too.
There's not been one issue where where I have not owned up to a mistake. All right? And I would tell the truth all the time. If I make an error, I'm gonna tell you. I am not gonna try and hide it, I'm not gonna try and.
Well, I'm not gonna say.
I don't know what you're talking
to bring up errors, but there's always a case that it may happen. I'm sure. Yeah.
My history-
But we're not-
Mr. Rock, let's go one at a time. Mr. Cheney, you have the floor.
I'm done talking.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
But in the event that there,
I'm giving you back the floor. Do you want the floor?
I would like the floor.
You may have.
In the event there's an error or omission in your work, who would be the person to have the city back then?
Me,
So you would go against your company.
I would,
Thank you.
I would. And they know it. They expect it.
Excuse me, Mayor.
Okay, Mr. Cooney, you have the floor.
There are certain components within the proposed ordinance that are valid. I do recognize there are certain things that we need to update in order to reflect current practices and requirements. There are several issues that have come up. There are no other contracts on the agenda for tonight. I think it's an opportunity to go back to the working group to clarify some of the ideas. We're talking about dates. Pushing back, some of the dollar values, I'm following what you're doing. My concern is we're sort of, if we enact it the way that it is, their concerns for a losing city engineer. If we put a date on it, now we have to remember, if there's going to be any potential changes, we have to go back and revise the ordinance that hasn't taken effect yet. There are some questions I do think that information should be fleshed out so it can be presented in its whole. Because it can be discussed deeper in committee and then brought back to council for approval. But I do agree with what you're saying, Mr. Rock. But there are still some questions that are coming out and it kind of try to piecemeal this together may not be the most appropriate way to do it, which serves everybody best.
Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Cooney. Mr. Cool, thank you.
So I've proposed some language to the law director, which is intended to cut Mr. Cheney and his work out of the contract in its entirety until a date certain or until future action from council.
The ordinance contract.
The ordinance, excuse me. And I would be adding to attachment B, a paragraph J, which reads, notwithstanding any provision herein, this ordinance shall not apply to the work of the city engineer until December 31st, 2023, or until future action of council. And the intent there is to have all of the provisions go into effect for the work of the city and to have time to discuss with Mr. Cheney and others, maybe how else the effects of this need to be amended. And the reason I want to do that is because it is important that the work of this council and that's the need for this ordinance not be delayed or thwarted by the administration, while at the same time, and something that we've all been aware of, is not holding the directors of the city who are good professionals and do good work for the citizens of the city accountable for the actions of others. Mr. Cheney and his work should not be impugned and they shouldn't be punished because we have not been given the proper time to hash this out in the working committee. So this is what I mean. Mayor, I'll also give back the floor to you and you can change anything. Thank you. This is what,
Yeah, thank you. I've had a conversation with Mr. Cheney already. After this ordinance was going to be on the agenda, I was going to make another finance meeting anyways, because we wanted to talk about an RFQ process. And Mr. Cheney has provided me with some templates anyways. So I like that idea of carving this piece out and having Mr. Cheney come to committee and we can really hash out a process that everybody is comfortable with. And then we can come back and put this piece back into the ordinance. And I think that will be, I think that's acceptable to Mr. Toomey, and we can get the RFQ piece hammered out as well.
Mr. Cheney.
Yes, and I welcome the RFQ process, right, so that I can submit my qualifications versus my competitors. But again, and we'll talk about it in committee. You need a committee then to review that. You need a committee to put that RFP together. And you need somebody to decide, because I'm gonna be submitted, so I can't. All right, so you're gonna need that infrastructure in place, which is the same thing with this ordinance we're passing here. I have no problems with the thresholds there, the 15, the 50, all that stuff. But you have to have infrastructure in place to do that. All right, and my question tonight was, if you're expecting that of me for the $12,000 that I'm paid, I'm not interested. That's my comment. Okay.
So I feel that this can be, we can figure this out. We also happen to have a lay facilities committee where most of those members are architects, engineers that have qualifications that can review, kind of like our IT committee, where we have professionals that actually review the RFQ. So we do have that piece in, but I know, because we've had this relationship over the last year where we worked well together, that we can come to.
If I could just add the $12,000 salary, that was the prior salary. We talked about it, maybe we're looking to raise that. If you understand that it's going to work in reviewing proposals, reviewing other architects or other engineers' work, we understand that. So that is something that's going to be adjusted. It's something that's needed in the city. To have you be the city engineer in that capacity, it's going to be compensated fairly. We're not going to leave you hanging out dry. We just have to have this whole entire thing be fair. That'd be fair for everyone.
Yeah.
Mr. Gould. So just again, Mr. Toomey, I've confirmed with the law director, and I want to say clearly for the record that the effect of this paragraph is to cut you and your work out, so that if this passes, it has no effect on you or the work that you do under the current contract. I appreciate the grace that you gave us in extending that to the end of the year, and I want to provide as much time as possible to do exactly what my colleagues just said would happen. And I want to make sure that you're comfortable with, as it applies to you and your work, being able to do exactly what you're doing right now and cutting you out of this way.
I think I'm comfortable, but I gotta be honest, I gotta send it to my company president and our corporate attorney. They'll have to take a look at it.
Well, my commitment to you is if you have issues with it, let me know, and I will bring this back at the next meeting for further amendment according to what you and your people need. Again, I respect the work that you've done. I respect the concession that you made at the last meeting about continuing under your contract. And the intent that I have here is that this has no effect on you until we decide.
I appreciate it.
So, Mayor, I'm going to withdraw my motion to approve the ordinance, and instead will make a motion to amend attachment B to the ordinance to add paragraph J, which reads as follows. Notwithstanding any provision herein, this ordinance shall not apply to the work of the city engineer until December 31st, 2023, or until further action of council. Again, notwithstanding any provision herein, this ordinance shall not apply to the work of the city engineer until December 31st, 2023, or until further action of council.
I'll withdraw my second and second your revised motion.
So make sure I have this letter J, notwithstanding any provision herein, this ordinance shall not apply to the work of the city engineer until December 31st, 2023, or until further action of council. So, yeah. So was that a motion then to make that amendment here to exhibit B? Yes. Okay. So we have a motion by Mr. Gould, second by Mr. Roth. Is there any discussion on the motion?
Excuse me, Mayor.
Yeah. Mr. Gould.
Is that on emergency?
Well, this is just the amendment.
No, thank you.
All right, so there's no further discussion, we'll take a vote on the amendment adding letter J to exhibit B.
Mrs. Sacks,
Aye.
Mrs. Blankenfeld,
Aye.
Mr. Rock,
Aye.
Mrs. Wise,
Aye.
Mr. Gould,
Aye.
Mr. Cooney,
Aye.
Mr. King.
For purposes of the record, Mayor, and so that it's in the minutes, I'll just offer my legal opinion that the ordinance as amended would carve Mr. Cheney out of the provisions of the ordinance and would allow him to continue to do business as usual under his existing contract.
Question for the law record.
Yes, go ahead.
So what would that mean with the $15,000 spending authority?
Yeah, the $15,000 spending authority applies to the administration, so,
So any,
but that's, yeah.
any proposal over 15, even though part of it is existing contract. So,
I think that's correct, yes.
I mean, that hasn't been done customarily. We don't do that with you.
Well, the law director is pulled out of it.
Right, but we're talking about what the status quo was.
Really. What if the city engineer be pulled out as well?
It's not, it's not everybody.
Mr. McConnell, nothing against you. I'm sure if you were to do a project for the city in which we would need your legal advice, it has a separate job code, it's a top number, you would provide a proposal and we would review it and consider it. Same thing here for the city engineer, every single project. has a business project.
That's not completely accurate. I just want to correct the record. It's customary, for example, when litigation comes in, for me to perform services under my ordinance at the rate of $175 an hour. There's no cap on that. It's just fee for service on an hourly basis during the pendency of the litigation.
Okay, but for design work, that doesn't necessarily follow the same suit because the general engineering services have a specific job code, general engineering services at an hourly rate that we approve. For design work, if we were to do a design project for, say, to redo Warrenville Center Road, there's a specific proposal that's prepared by DPD and approved by the mayor. We do not see that. That is a contract that is prepared, executed without our review. So I think that's why it's a little different. It's not based on the hourly rate. It's based on hourly rates that are approved. But the specific proposal has specific language with a specific project.
It also says in contract with or service provided by the city director. That is very encompassing.
Well, now we're conflating what the law will be with what the law currently is. And what the law currently is that if Luke McConville spends $100,000 on University Square, he didn't have to come in advance to make a proposal regarding a $15,000 threshold. His compensation is a model of where he's paid a set amount followed by certain projects that are then hourly, and that's all part of his compensation. And Mr. Cheney is the same way and has been historically.
But what I'm saying is that there's a carve out in the logic.
But the difference is Mr. McConville doesn't prepare a
Right,
proposal
but
for
we
that.
carved the city engineer out of the ordinance. I mean, we just did that by the amendment. We're saying that the ordinance does not apply to the city engineer. So I retract what I said earlier. I think that, you know, professional services have not typically been regulated in this way in the city. And so if we're carving the city engineer out for 2023, then he's carved out. I mean, he's not, he would do business as he's done it in the past under his current contract, the same contract.
So if hypothetically, and I don't want to say 2023, but if hypothetically, there was a project that required $1 million worth of design work. And GPD billed us up towards $1 million of design work. There's nothing council can do about it under the existing arrangement.
Hypothetically, that's true, but if, for example, you were to eliminate the requirement that all work over $50,000 be bid and simply apply anything over 15,000 must come to council for approval, then you would be able to monitor that and kind of pay as you go. You would be able to set not to exceed limits And then anytime the not to exceed limit was met, they would have to come back to you and ask for additional approval. And that way, you would be able to control the 2%. And I think the piece that Mr. Cheney has an issue with, and I don't want to put words in his mouth, he can speak for himself if I'm getting this incorrect, but the piece that he has a problem with is the piece that requires him to go out to bid for projects that are larger in scope and likely to be in excess of $50,000. And the reality is that when you're hiring a third party, the problem that they encounter or the thing that they're battling against is overhead. When he goes out and performs a small job in somebody's backyard, he's covering the overhead on that. And he doesn't really make a decent buck unless he gets the larger scope work. The economies of scale don't work. Now, you can correct me if I'm wrong about that, but I know that that's the way it works for the law director. If I wasn't getting the opportunity to represent the city in litigation, the economics of this would really be problematic for me, because the number of hours that I spend working on University Heights relative to the West Side office and the overhead that I pay at my firm, it just doesn't add up. And that I think is what you're hearing. That is the reason that Mr. Cheney is saying, if you force me to do that, I'm going to have to consider giving you my resignation. Economics don't work. Am I right about that?
Thank you, Mr. McDonald. I heard a voice over here, Mr. Gould.
I just want to be real clear when I meant like hands off the city engineer, I meant hands off the city engineer, and so I'm just going to make another motion to amend. Now, exhibit A of this ordinance to add the same paragraph as paragraph I. Because from the Conville point, actually, we didn't carve them out of ordinance 2021-01, we carved them out of 2021. I guess it kind of is of both of them, but I just want to be clear, so we probably should add it to 212.01 as well, contracting provision.
I think I don't have an issue with that. It's a little bit of boots and belts and suspenders, but that's okay. I think you kind of make it clear it's carved out.
And the reason I want to do that is because we just told Mr. Cheney that the work goes on, and I appreciate Mr. Ross, and I didn't hear Mr. Cheney say, I don't want to be accountable to council and come to you when the price is over 50,000. So as to avoid awarding myself $1 million, I just want to be able to award myself $50,000 and then come to you and say, this is what I've done. It's over $15,000 approved. But that's something to be, I think, discussed with him and his, partners and whoever from GPD in committee. That doesn't have to be done tonight. And the moral of the story tonight is hands off Mr. Cheney. So I feel like so my motion is to add a paragraph I to 212.01 exhibit A, the same paragraph. We just added to exhibit B. It is notwithstanding any provision herein, this ordinance shall not apply to the work of the city engineer until December 31st, 2023, or until further action.
And we have a motion by Mr. Gould. Is there a second? Second by Mrs. Is there any discussion on this amendment? Seeing none, Mrs. Thomas, we call the roll on the amendment.
Mrs. Sacks.
Aye.
Mrs. Blanco.
Aye.
Mr. Rock.
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss.
Aye.
Mr. Gould.
Aye.
Mr. Cooney.
Aye.
Mr. King.
Okay, motion carries.
I'll make a motion to pass ordinance 2023-07, amending codified ordinance sections 212.01 entitled contracting procedures and 212.02 entitled professional contracts, unique services and or supplies, and declaring an emergency as amended on emergency.
Okay, we have a motion to adopt ordinance 2023-07 as amended on emergency by Mr. Gould. Is there a second? Second by Mrs. Weiss. Any discussion? Okay, I have one thing. I just want to make sure that everybody understands that even as amended, a yes vote on this today means that we're firing Joe Cheney at the end of the year.
I think you did that by recruiting his firm.
I'm sorry, what was that?
I think you already fired him when you recruited his firm for the next contract and removing him as the city engineer.
Okay, that was something that was asked for by GPD Group and through the city engineer.
Call the question.
Okay, question's been called. Then we'll take two votes. Mrs. Thomas, will you call the roll first on the suspension of the rules?
Mrs. Sacks,
Aye.
Mrs. Blankenfeld,
Aye.
Mr. Rod,
Aye.
Mrs. Wise, Mr. Gould,
Aye.
Mr. Cooney,
Aye.
Mr. King,
Aye.
And then on the main motion.
Mrs. Sacks,
Aye.
Mrs. Blankenfeld.
Aye.
Mr. Rod,
Aye.
Mrs. Wise.
Aye.
Mr. Gould,
Aye.
Mr. Cooney,
Aye.
Mr. King.
Motion carries. Next item is item L, motion confirming Mr. Timothy Lloyd of the Board of Zoning Appeals for a two-year term commencing February 2023 through January 2025. Mr. Lloyd currently serves on the BZA. This is simply a renewal of another two-year term. Mrs. Warren.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I can tell you that Mr. Lloyd and letter and Mrs. Lonsky are excellent. They're not additions, they're excellent members of the BZA and hope for them continuing.
Thank you. Is there any further comment?
I would just add an editorial comment that is in echoing what Mrs. Weiss just said. The Board of Zoning Appeals, including Mr. Lloyd and Mrs. Jablonski, is an outstanding board. They're highly sophisticated. They work with the residents in a collaborative manner to try to achieve good results for the community. They function very smoothly, and we benefit from all of their expertise.
Thank you, Mr. McConnell. Is there a motion? Motion to confirm Mr. Timothy Lloyd, the Board of Zoning Appeals for a two-year term commencing February 2023 through January 2025 by Mrs. Weiss. Is there a second? Second by Mrs. Blankfeld. Any further discussion? Seeing none, Mrs. Thomas, will you call the roll?
Mrs. Sacks.
Aye.
Mrs. Blankenfeld. Aye. Mr. Rod.
Aye.
Mrs. Wise.
Aye.
Mr. Gould.
Aye.
Mr. Cooney.
Aye.
Mr. King.
Aye.
Okay, motion carried. Next is item M, motion confirming Mrs. Kelly Jablonski to the Board of Zoning Appeals for a two-year term commencing February 2023 through January 2025. I think we can incorporate the same comments. And is there a motion to confirm? Motion by Mrs. Weiss. Is there a second? Second by Mrs. Blankfeld. Any discussion? Mrs. Thomas, we call the roll.
Mrs. Sacks.
Aye.
Mrs. Blankenfeld.
Aye.
Mr. Rod.
Aye.
Mrs. Wise.
Aye.
Mr. Gould.
Aye.
Mr. Cooney.
Aye.
Mr. King.
Aye.
Okay, motion carries. Now you'll recall we amended the agenda, and the new item N is a motion to approve flexible contracts for police and fire at an amount not to exceed $26,000 upon recommendation of the Safety Committee. Mr. Gould, you chair that committee. Would you like the floor?
Thank you, Mayor. The safety committee heard testimony from both the police and fire chief regarding the electrical contracts, which were in the safety committee packet. These are contracts which update the annual electrical contracts for local fire and police, and are requested by the chiefs. The safety committee unanimously recommended that this body approve those, and I'll make a motion according to that recommendation.
Okay, very good. We have a motion by Mr. Gould. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. King. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, Mrs. Thomas, will you call the roll?
Mrs. Sacks.
Aye.
Mrs. Blankenfeld. Aye. Mr. Rod.
Aye.
Mrs. Wise.
Aye.
Mr. Gould.
Aye.
Mr. Cooney.
Aye.
Mr. King.
Aye.
Very good, motion carries. Next is item O, motion to authorize GPD to rebid the annual pavement remarking program for 2023 upon recommendation of the Safety Committee. Mr. Gould.
Thank you, Mayor. Again, Mr. Tree wrote a memo to the safety committee recommending go out for bid for the 2023 season. believe you already put on the record, a little bit earlier, why he did that, which was to, insulate the city from the higher costs of the second and third year of the contract. This was actually recommended to, by him on the record when we approved, the 3-year bid for, JD, striping, because their second and third year were so much higher than the first. You accepted it for the first year and consider going back out. So by doing this, GPD suggests that we go back out to see where the costs are, because in years past, they were around 46,000, 49 was year one of the current contract, and going up to $70,000 or $80,000, which is much higher for the second or third year. Again, this was unanimously passed by the safety committee, and based on that recommendation, I would make a motion, or was unanimously passed with the recommendation that this body pass that authorization, and based on that recommendation, we'll make a motion.
Okay, we have a motion by Mr. Gould. Is there a second?
I'll second, but I have a comment on the motion or question about the motion.
Very good. So we have a second by Mr. Rock. You have the floor.
This is for the chair of the safety committee. Did you guys review, I'm sorry, I missed the meeting today, I had another appointment. The items or quantities were misrepresented at the last biddings, or those can be corrected for this one?
Yes, we discussed who the work, that work belonged to, and there were two issues. Who's responsible for going to the parking lot and making sure that if we're doing the parking lots, that those lines are done or not done? And we agreed that that would be in concert with both GPD and the administration, like the police department. And then recalculating the total lines to be used is going to be GPD's responsibility. That is part of their bid package, and bidding this out, they will accurately calculate the actual lines to be used. We placed upon the record in the safety committee the historical issues that have been present since the police department had a line person on the staff. Why the necessity when you have someone on your staff to have accurate lines wasn't necessarily there, and basically rehashed the conversation we already had at our general meeting about why those numbers were off. So GPD will be responsible for accurately calculating the 2023 mileage. Is that right, Mr. Judy?
That is correct. Okay, design feasible.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Okay, is there any further question or comment? And if not, Mrs. Thomas, we call the roll.
Mrs. Sacks,
Aye.
Mrs. Langell,
Aye.
Mr. Rock,
Aye.
Mrs. Wise,
Aye.
Mr. Gould,
Aye.
Mr. Cooney,
Aye.
Mr. King.
Aye.
Very good, motion carries. Next is item P, a motion to enter into executive session for the purpose of discussing legal proceedings, personal and real estate matters. There are no matters for which the administration seeks an executive session this evening. Therefore, we will now turn
Yeah,
to,
I have a legal.
Legal and real estate.
I guess.
I think I know what you're referring to. I think you can say it's litigation in real estate.
I thought it was both, yeah.
okay, we apparently have a litigation and real estate matter to take into the executive session. Is there a motion to enter that executive session at the conclusion of the regular portion of this meeting for litigation? Motion by Mr. Rock. Second by Mrs. Weiss. Mrs. Thomas, we call the roll.
Seth,
Aye.
Ms. Langell, aye, Mr. Rock,
Aye.
Mrs. Wise, aye, Mr. Gould,
Aye.
Mr. Cooney.
Aye.
Mr. King.
Aye.
Okay, we will have that executive session later in the meeting. We turn now to reports and communications from directors, finance, Mr. Kennedy.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a point for everybody to note that the approval of that lobbying contract, we will at some point this year have to go on the budget because it's not included in the original budget proposal for the year. So when we do a mid-year budget adjustment, that should be one of the items for you to all see. Secondly, just want to let everybody know, because of the problems Cuyahoga County's had with issuing property tax bills, They normally go out in the middle of December and are due in the middle of January. This year, they got significantly behind. They're now due in February. What that means to us and in a lot of other political subdivisions is that our first advance on property tax receipts was very low because in essence, none of the bills were signed. So we will be expecting our second collection to catch up a bit. But that did kind of play havoc with our cash flow there through the end of January and the beginning of February. But I'll keep everybody posted on that. But eventually, hopefully that will all get caught up. And I was going to review all those summary results of operations that I had sent everybody. Just in a real high overview to let everybody know that our revenue exceeded our original estimates for the year last year, both in the general fund and with all funds in total. Our expenses were about 4.76% under the final budget. The council approved that budget was $16.7 million. And our cash position for the year, at the beginning of the year last year, our unexpended balance was 5.3 million. We ended up with an unexpended balance in the general fund of 6.5 million. So we increased by a little bit under $1.2 million during 2022. If anybody has any questions about any of the details of the reports, I'd be happy to sit down with anybody, or if you want to put it on a finance committee agenda to give a more thorough report. It's it for me right now. We did start the audit as well. We'll be done with that probably sometime beginning of April.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Mr. Candy. Any questions for Mr. Candy? Mrs. Wong.
Yes, thank you. I was just wondering, since you said our cash flow is not where it should be, do you foresee having to have anything from our investments, or do you think?
No. No, we should be okay, but I just want to put that on everybody's radar because usually the advances are much more than they were this year. But again, that's something countywide that everybody's got. We did have still getting the final numbers in. We did a good month income tax wise in January. I should close January this week, so I will get those numbers out this week. But we're okay. Catch up.
Thank you. Director of Law, Mr. McCombie.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm reporting back to council on the question of whether, I guess, two questions with respect to the possibility of having a viewing room offsite that would accommodate disabled residents who wish to attend meetings and or participate in public participation portion of the meeting. On the legal side, we have done additional research, and we're comfortable that such an arrangement would be a legitimate accommodation under the ADA, and provided that the technology worked. I did have a conversation with Mrs. Thomas as directed, and in the course of that conversation, and Mrs. Thomas, correct me if I'm wrong, she indicated that she believes the technology would revolve around a Zoom connection, and that it would be basically through Zoom that we would be attempting to facilitate the public participation. So, you know, the technology piece does cause me some heartburn, just because, you know, if you have an instance where the technology fails, then you've included, potentially you included someone from being able to participate publicly, and then you have an ADA violation. So you really would need to be as confident as you possibly can be that you have technology that's going to work seamlessly. If you get there, your confidence level, you know, our legal analysis is that that kind of accommodation is permissible.
Okay, thank you, Mr. McCombie. Next is public safety, please.
Mayor, no report.
Okay, no report. Thank you, Chief Rogers. Public safety, fire.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, council. Just one item to report on tonight. This is in regards to the Cleveland firefighter line of duty death that occurred last November. I just have some remarks about it. Firefighter fatalities are a reality of our job. We accept that when we're hired and sworn in. But that doesn't make it easy to accept when it actually occurs. Obviously, it affects the greater fire community, it affects the community that that firefighter serves in, as well as their families and loved ones at home. November of last year, Cleveland firefighter Johnny Tetrick, with 27 years on the job in Cleveland, was struck while operating at an emergency incident. His coworkers transported him to the nearby hospital where he was pronounced dead. He was 51 years old, and he was survived by his wife and 3 children. This tragic event has showcased the true meaning of brotherhood in our fire service. Big city, small suburb, or volunteer, we're all the same humans serving the same cause. It was an unprecedented event to have all Cleveland Fire Department units completely placed out of service for his funeral service. The Cuyahoga County Fire Chiefs Association worked with the Cleveland Division of Fire and worked a plan in place to have 160 firefighters from suburb departments in Cuyahoga County to cover all 25 Cleveland fire stations. This was a total of 23 engines and 11 ladder trucks. This tragic event showcased the great people that exist in this sometimes dark world. You didn't have to personally know firefighter Tetrick to understand the kind of firefighter, father, son, friend, Christian, and human he was. If you did not have an opportunity to watch the funeral service, I highly recommend it. It can be viewed on YouTube. If you watch the parts of the service, especially those of his shipmates and his daughters, you quickly learned that firefighter Tetrick was more than just a firefighter, rather a role model for us as humans, true definition of a senior firefighter and a mentor. He was quoted that his priorities were always God first, family second, and people third. He was optimistic and positive in his influence to everyone. He also brought out the best in people and clearly touched those that he interacted with and left them with inspiration to live life to his fullest. In gratitude for the collaboration of all the firefighters that assisted with the funeral service coverage, Cleveland Fire Department has given us really nice plaque to every fire department. So we thank Cleveland Fire Department for doing that. I also wanted to extend my own gratitude and on behalf of all of our firefighters in the department for this current administration and city council support for us to participate in doing things like this. But it means a lot to us. It meant a lot to the Cleveland Fire Department, and I'm sure the Tetrick family as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Service Department, Mr. Picorni.
No report there.
Thank you. Housing and Community Development, Mr. Engelbrecht.
Right. Always, yeah, good evening. Just an update on the community development side of the department. On January 27th, NOACA's Planning and Programming Committee passed the cities of University Heights, Cleveland Heights, and South People's proposal for the Heights Regional Neighborhood Greenway Phase 1. Our combined efforts to collaborate and connect our cities through improving and enhancing mobility options for our residents through bicycle boulevards, also known as neighborhood greenways, is the first in the Cleveland region and is part of the much broader component of the Cuyahoga County Planning Commission's Cuyahoga Greenways Network. This will eventually link our communities with other neighborhoods, parks, Lake Erie, the Cuyahoga River, and public transit through a comprehensive countywide network of trails that are safe and welcoming for people of all ages and abilities. The first phase will serve as a pilot program for other communities to follow throughout the region in implementing this larger plan. The greenways themselves will use signs and pavement markings to encourage trips by bicycle and promote safe, convenient bicycle crossings along parallel residential streets instead of using Warrensville Center Road
or Cedar Road as examples. Cedar Road has 30,000 cars a day and is pretty much unsafe for use for bicycle transportation. The total cost of the grant, or the total amount of the grant, is $281,628, of which roughly $60,000 will be used by University Heights, and is covered 100% by NOACA, which will include the installation of signs and shells along Washington, Silsbee, Saybrook, Traymore, South Belvoir, for us in this first phase. As the grant was approved by the Planning and Programming Committee, it goes for a vote before the NOACA board in March. Planning will continue between our municipalities to further link our communities through the Calgary Greenways plan and assist in moving us towards a more sustainable future. And kudos to Councilman Brian King, who was part of the planning efforts. Eric Zamps of Cleveland Heights, Ken Bernard of Cleveland Heights, Keith Benjamin of South Euclid, Elaine Price of the Calgary Planning Commission, Sam Bell of the City of Cleveland Heights, and again, Brian King, thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Englebrand. Thank you for all your strong work on this. So I know you covered this, but the full meeting, the meeting of the full board of NOACA is March 10th. It's anticipated that this will pass that meeting, but obviously it doesn't pass until it does, but we cleared a very important hurdle by clearing the planning and programming committees, getting the recommendation of the NOACA staff that this be approved by committee, and the committee did in fact approve it. Typically, full board will approve what the committees have recommended, so it is not a foregone conclusion that it couldn't change. We can be reasonably confident that the full board will agree and take it up and anticipate passage. So, thank you. Any questions for Mr. Engelberg? All right, then we turn now to the city engineer.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Just have one item to report. I received an email from ODOT earlier today, which I shared with Mr. Kennedy and you about the Cedar Road project. There are a couple of punch list items yet to do in the spring, and there's a couple very small pay items that they're not closed out yet. But at this time, the local share of the project is under budget by $392,000. So I'm not saying that that'll be the final number, but it's going to be close to that. And we will be getting a refund from ODOT because we have to put the money up front prior to them letting the contract. I don't know the timing on when ODOT will actually close things out and write us a check, but I would anticipate it would be sometime this year. But, good news for the city. That's all I have.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Cheney. Any questions for Mr. Cheney? Okay, thank you. Communications and civic engagement, Mr. Cook.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. I'll keep this to two quick items since it's getting late. One's up earlier on the agenda. I'll have more chatty reports, so strong word, Vice Mayor Weiss. First item is next mosaic will be printed by the time we meet here as a group again. It should be in your mailboxes by then. If there's any delays with the post office, I'll bring copies to the next meeting. One of the things that the magazine will include will be the Black History Month resolution that passed this evening. Secondly, as the mayor said in his report, the state of the city is the 15th at 6 p.m. at John Carroll. Unlike past years where it's been in the Jardine Room, this year it'll be in the auditorium at Dolan. And the reason it's going to be there is the parking. Jardine's probably a better room just because it's a little bit smaller and people are familiar because we've been there before, but just this year it's going to be in the auditorium because of parking. Thank you.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Mr. Cook. Any questions for Mr. Cook? Yes, Mr. Gould.
Mr. Cook, what's the status of the IT here? I know you were going to have some meetings with Starfish, and I just wanted to get an update from you on that.
Right, you know, I should have sent it to all council. I was in contact with the mayor, vice mayor, and council. Short answer, hopefully next meeting, Starfish has ordered the equipment. There was some delays with getting that just due to supply chain issues. So I'm meeting with them here on Thursday afternoon, so I anticipate it'll be all good to go.
Great. What was the issue that was identified and what equipment was ordered to address that issue?
I'll send you the exact information, but it's one of the initial concerns they had, and I'm not sure this was the final concern, just the fact of getting good Wi-Fi service here, especially in the evening, since this building is surrounded by apartment complexes. You can imagine everyone at Netflix and, you know, on their phones in the evening. I think that was why we sometimes have trouble getting a signal here. Again, I can more than happy to share the back and forth with them, so you have more of the details that would explain it probably better than I can here.
Okay, thanks so much.
You're welcome.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Any other questions from you? All right. Economic development. Oh, okay. Mrs. Drucker is excused from this meeting. And I don't think we have a report, so. Next one. We now turn to the reports of standing committees and the taking of action thereon. Mrs. White.
Thank you, Mayor.
Building
The
House.
Building and Housing Committee will have a meeting prior to the next regularly scheduled council meeting on February 20th.
Thank you. Community outreach, Mr. King.
No report, man.
Thank you. Economic development, Mr. Rowe.
Yes, Mayor, we had a meeting on January 11th. That Vice Mayor read into the record, the report on that meeting at the last council meeting. Sorry, I couldn't make it to that. There was also supposed to be a meeting on January 25th for the zoning code. Meet with ZoneCo, and unfortunately that was postponed due to weather. So that is going to be scheduled March 22nd, 6 o'clock at John Carroll University Jardine. And I hope. But that brings up a good point. But it is the 22nd.
It is the 22nd. Okay, thank you, Mr. Rock. Finance, Mrs. Wayne.
Yes, based on tonight's meeting, we will be making a finance meeting within the next 2 to 3 weeks to resolve the professional service ordinance.
Okay, thank you, Mrs. Wayne. Recreation, Mr. Cooney.
No report there, but I do have a question for Mrs. Banko.
Yes.
February 20th is President's Day. The council meeting was moved to the 21st. Would that date be correct? I wouldn't be opposed to attending, so we'll make sure the right day. I don't.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Cooney. Safety, Mr. Gould.
Thank you, Mayor. In addition to the items that we already placed on the record, we do 2 items. Discuss traffic. With changes in the city and come new issues that are presenting themselves in various areas, including Hadley Road and another intersection of the city. The police chief is going to work with the city engineer and your office to coordinate our response to those things, to try to find a middle ground. And we'll report back at the next meeting or the one thereafter on those.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Gould. Service utilities, Mrs. Sapp.
Thank you, Mayor. No additional report to remarks earlier made. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Sacks. Committee of the whole, Mrs. Wayne.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. There will be a committee of the whole meeting, hopefully within the next month, to finalize the GPD assessment. It is unclear based on emails from GPD whether they will assist the committee in doing that or not, but that will be hopefully clarified within the next.
Okay, thank you, Mrs. Wayne. Next is reports of special committees and taking of action thereon. Are there any reports? Seeing none, next is unfinished and miscellaneous business. Seeing none, next then is the executive session we previously moved and entered. I'm unaware, while I understand there is a litigation and real estate matter. I'm not privy to what those matters are, so I'm unable to opine as to whether any action will be taken on the record following that.
No action.
That said, if no action is taken, then the only other item will be a motion to adjourn when we return. Otherwise, if we do not see you when we come back, thank you. Have a good evening.
Good luck.
I just, I'm gonna be everybody, hey. I'm here, I'm here. But,
We'll be good out of here.
no, right.
Good luck.
It's always hard to be on the other
Well, that's
side.
very good.
That's the other side of the meet. On floor, back and forth. Never entertaining. Thank you.
Oh, okay, we've got a lot of stuff for you. Oh, good. So what I say, this is yellow. Really helpful to me today. You know what I'm saying? So I figured it out. I think I kind of do lines. No, I mean, like, this one is here, this was a, you know, it's not marks, not every. Like someone gets two, this is three, you know. It's really helpful. I want to say. Okay. Thank you, thank you.
We're doing it again.
Thank you very much.
There a motion to return to regular session. A motion by Mr. Gould, second by Mr. Rock. Thomas, we call the roll.
Ms. Glanville. Mr. Rock.
Aye.
Mrs. Wise.
Aye.
Ms. Gould.
Aye.
Aye.
Mr. King.
Aye. Motion to adjourn.
There's a motion to adjourn by, Mr. King, second by Mr. Cooney. Mrs. Thomas, we call the roll.
Aye.
Glanville.
Aye.
Mr. Rock.
Aye.
Mr. Wise. Mr. Gould.
Aye.
Mr. Cooney.
Aye.
Mr. King.
Aye.
Adjourn.
No, I understand. Sure, let's get it. No, I'm good. No. Okay. Want to go to the final?
Yeah. Really?
Yeah, I got it.
Years.
End of the year is done. I gotta get ready for our meeting and tell them how much money we took